The nightmare always began the same way. Desert heat pressing down like a physical weight, the kind of heat that made the air shimmer and dance above the sand, turning distant shapes into liquid mirages. Daniel Reeves stood in the courtyard of a compound somewhere in the Hindu Kush. Though the geography had long since blurred in his memory, all those missions bleeding together into one endless landscape of dust and blood, and the constant thrumming awareness that death walked beside them like a patient companion. In the dream he could smell it first. Cordite and copper, the metallic tang of fresh blood, mixing with the ever-present dust that coated everything in Afghanistan, that worked its way into pores and lungs and somehow into the soul itself. His rifle was up, scanning the rooftops, the doorways, the shadows that pooled in every corner of the ancient mud brick structures. Somewhere behind him, Tommy Chen was talking, always talking, that endless stream of observations and jokes and complaints that drove everyone crazy until you realized one day that the silence without it would be unbearable. Tommy's voice in the dream was always the same. "Hey, Danny, you think when we get back, Maria's gonna believe I actually saved your ass that time in Kandahar? Or is she gonna call bullshit like always?" And Danny would turn to answer, to fire back with something about how Tommy couldn't save a seat at a movie theater, let alone save anyone's ass. But the words never came. Instead, there was the flash, the heat, the pressure wave that lifted him off his feet and sent him tumbling through air that had suddenly become solid, a wall of force that shattered the world into fragments. When he landed, his left knee screaming with a pain that would become his constant companion for years to come, he crawled. Through the smoke and the debris and the ringing silence that had replaced all other sound, he crawled toward where Tommy had been standing. Found him propped against a wall that was no longer there. Half of it blown away by the explosion that shouldn't have happened. Couldn't have happened because they had cleared this area 3 times and there was nothing here. Nothing except the trap that someone had laid specifically for them. Tommy's eyes were still open. His lips were moving, trying to form words that Danny leaned close to hear, ignoring the pain in his leg, ignoring the blood he could feel running down his own face, ignoring everything except his brother, his friend, the man who had watched his back through 3 deployments and countless firefights, and who was now slipping away in his arms. The words Tommy spoke in the dream were never the same words he'd spoken in reality. In reality, there had been nothing, just the light fading from those eyes, and the weight of a body going limp, and the howling grief that Danny had pushed down deep into some locked compartment of his soul. Because there was no time for grief, there was only the mission, always the mission. But in the dream, Tommy spoke with perfect clarity, and his words changed every night as if his ghost were trying to tell Danny something different, each time something he could never quite remember upon waking. Tonight, Tommy looked at him with those dying eyes and said, "It wasn't an accident, brother. You know that. You've always known." Danny woke in the darkness of his bedroom at 3:47 a.m., the red numbers of his alarm clock burning through the blackness like a judgment. His heart was slamming against his ribs, his skin slick with sweat that had soaked through his t-shirt and into the sheets beneath him. For a long moment, he lay there staring at the ceiling, waiting for his pulse to slow, for his breathing to steady, for the familiar geometry of his bedroom to reassert itself over the fading images of the dream. 3 years. 3 years since that day at Camp Billy Machin in Nevada, the training accident that had ended his career and taken Tommy's life. 3 years of nights like this one, of waking in darkness, with the smell of blood still sharp in his nostrils, and the weight of failure pressing down on his chest like a stone. The Navy had given him a medal and a medical retirement, and a handshake had thanked him for his service and sent him on his way, and he had done his best to build something like a normal life from the wreckage. He sat up slowly, swinging his legs over the side of the bed, feeling the familiar twinge in his left knee that would never fully heal. The scar there was ugly, a thick rope of tissue that marked where the surgeons had pieced him back together. But it was nothing compared to the scars that didn't show. He ran a hand over his face, feeling the stubble that had grown in overnight, the lines that had deepened around his eyes in the years since he'd left the teams. 39 years old, and some mornings he felt twice that. Some mornings he felt ancient, worn down to nothing by the weight of all the things he'd seen and done and failed to prevent. The house was quiet around him, the small 3-bedroom on Cassidy Street that he'd bought with his retirement pay and what remained of Jennifer's life insurance. It wasn't much, but it was theirs, his and Lily's, a place where they could build something that resembled stability. He listened for a moment, heard the soft tick of the ceiling fan in the hallway, the distant murmur of the ocean that was never quite absent in Oceanside, the small coastal city that had become their home. He rose and padded barefoot down the hall, stopping at the door to Lily's room. She slept with a nightlight, a small lamp shaped like a unicorn that cast a soft pink glow across her face. 7 years old, his daughter with her mother's golden hair spread across the pillow, and her mother's stubborn chin, and her mother's way of smiling that could break his heart and heal it all in the same instant. She was clutching her stuffed rabbit, the one Jennifer had given her on her second birthday just weeks before the accident that had taken her mother away. Danny stood in the doorway for a long time, watching his daughter sleep, feeling the familiar rush of love and terror that came with being a parent. She was everything to him, this small person, this miracle he hadn't known he needed until she arrived. Every morning he woke up grateful that she was still here, still safe, still whole. Every night he checked her room before he slept, assuring himself that the world hadn't taken her from him too. The dreams were worse on nights when he'd been thinking about the past, and last night had been full of memories. He'd gotten a call from Mike Torres, his old teammate, and the conversation had stirred up things Danny had been trying to keep buried. Mike was with the FBI, now working some kind of task force, and he'd called to warn Danny about something. Something happening right here in Oceanside in his own backyard. Danny turned away from Lily's door and went downstairs to make coffee. The kitchen was small but functional, decorated with Lily's artwork from school crayon drawings of houses and trees, and a family of stick figures that always made his throat tight. In most of the pictures, there were three figures: a daddy with brown hair, a little girl with yellow hair, and a mommy with wings watching over them from above. Lily understood that her mother was gone in the way that children understand such things, accepting the reality while still leaving room for magic, for the possibility that the people we love are never truly lost. The coffee maker gurgled to life, filling the kitchen with the familiar smell of brewing coffee, and Danny leaned against the counter, staring out the window at the darkness that was just beginning to gray with the approach of dawn. October in California meant the days were still warm, but the mornings carried a hint of coolness, a suggestion of the season that residents of other states would actually call autumn. He thought about Mike's call, about the words that had kept him awake even before the nightmares came. A trafficking ring, Mike had said, operating out of San Diego, reaching up into the coastal cities, taking women and selling them overseas. 7 confirmed disappearances in 2 years, probably more, that hadn't been reported. The FBI was investigating along with NCIS and local police, but they were chasing shadows. The people running this operation were smart, well-funded, connected. They knew how to stay hidden. And they were operating right here, Mike had said, right in Oceanside, in the shadow of Camp Pendleton, among the military families and veterans who called this place home. Danny had listened, had asked the questions you ask when you're trained to assess threats and gather intelligence. And then he'd told Mike the same thing he told everyone who wanted to pull him back into that world. I'm out, brother. I've got Lily. I can't do this anymore. But Mike's words had stayed with him, had wormed their way into his thoughts as he lay in bed waiting for sleep that wouldn't come. And when the nightmares finally did arrive, they were worse than usual, more vivid, more real. As if his subconscious were trying to tell him something, trying to prepare him for what was coming. The coffee was ready. Danny poured himself a cup and sat at the kitchen table, staring at the collection of Lily's schoolwork pinned to the refrigerator with magnets shaped like ladybugs. Her teacher said she was doing well, making friends, adjusting. The therapist Danny had taken her to after Jennifer's death said she was resilient, that children were more adaptable than we gave them credit for. But Danny saw the moments when Lily's smile would falter, when she'd look at something that reminded her of her mother and go quiet, retreating into a place where he couldn't follow. Those moments reminded him that healing wasn't linear, that wounds could hide beneath the surface and still bleed when you least expected. He drank his coffee as the sky lightened outside the window. As the sounds of the neighborhood began to stir, cars starting in driveways, dogs barking their morning greetings. By the time the first real light of dawn was streaming through the kitchen window, Danny had showered, shaved, and dressed in jeans and a gray t-shirt that stretched across his shoulders and showed the edges of the tattoos on his forearms. He was making breakfast pancakes and bacon when he heard the familiar sound of small feet on the stairs. Lily appeared in the kitchen doorway, her hair mussed from sleep, her eyes still carrying traces of whatever dreams had visited her in the night. She was wearing her unicorn pajamas, the purple ones with the silver horn patterns, and she was clutching something in her hand, a piece of paper folded into a small square. Morning, Bug. Danny kept his voice light, easy the way he always did with her. You ready for some pancakes? But Lily didn't answer right away. She stood there in the doorway looking at him with an expression that was too serious for a 7-year-old too knowing. Then she crossed the kitchen and pressed the folded paper into his hand. I made this for you, Daddy. At school yesterday, Mrs. Martinez said we should make cards for someone we love. Danny unfolded the paper carefully, his throat already tightening. It was a drawing done in crayon of a man with brown hair standing next to a little girl with yellow hair. They were holding hands, and above them, rendered in gold and silver crayon, was a large heart with the words, Best Daddy, written inside it. Below the figures in Lily's careful, crooked handwriting were the words, Thank you for always keeping me safe. He looked up from the drawing to find Lily watching him, her blue eyes bright with something between hope and anxiety, the way children look when they've offered a piece of their heart and are waiting to see if it will be accepted. Danny knelt down so he was at her level the way he always did when they had important conversations. This is beautiful, Bug. This is the best present anyone's ever given me. Lily's face broke into a smile, Jennifer's smile, the one that could light up a room. Really, really, I'm going to put it right here on the fridge, okay? Right where I can see it every morning. He stood and pinned the drawing to the refrigerator with a ladybug magnet, positioning it in the center where it would be the first thing he saw whenever he walked into the kitchen. When he turned back, Lily was beaming, and for a moment the weight that he carried everywhere, the guilt and the grief and the endless vigilance, lifted just enough to let him breathe. Now he said, How about those pancakes? They ate breakfast together at the kitchen table. Danny listening as Lily chattered about school, about her friend Sophie, who had a new puppy, about the book they were reading in class, about a rabbit who went on adventures. He asked questions and laughed at her jokes and marveled, as he did every day, at how much light she brought into his life. Before Lily, before Jennifer, Danny had been a different person. A warrior, a weapon, a man who moved through the world with a purpose that left no room for softness. He'd been good at his job, one of the best, but he'd never thought much about what came after, about who he would be when the fighting was done. Lily had changed everything. From the moment Jennifer had placed that tiny squalling bundle in his arms, Danny had felt something shift inside him, some fundamental reorganization of his priorities. This small person, this helpless creature who depended on him for everything, had become the center of his universe. He would do anything to protect her. He would give anything to ensure that she grew up safe and happy and whole. After breakfast, Danny helped Lily get ready for school, braiding her hair the way Jennifer had taught him during those first terrifying months of single parenthood, packing her lunch with the precision of a man who had once planned military operations. A sandwich cut into triangles because she liked the shape. Apple slices arranged in a flower pattern. A note folded into her lunchbox, the same note he put in every day. I love you, Bug. Have a great day. He walked her to the bus stop at the corner of their street, holding her hand as they crossed the quiet residential roads, watching for cars with the heightened awareness that had never quite left him, despite the years away from combat. The bus came yellow and rumbling, and Lily gave him one last hug before climbing the steps. She waved at him through the window as the bus pulled away, and Danny stood on the curb, watching until it disappeared around the corner, his heart doing that complicated thing it always did when she was out of his sight, that mix of trust and terror that parents everywhere knew but rarely talked about. The rest of the morning passed the way mornings usually did. Danny drove to the offices of Fortress Security Solutions, the consulting firm where he'd worked for the past 2 years, and sat through a meeting with a client who wanted a security assessment for a new corporate headquarters in La Jolla. He listened, asked questions, took notes, played the role of the professional consultant, even as part of his mind stayed fixed on Lily on the bus, carrying her to school, on all the ordinary dangers of an ordinary day. His colleagues at Fortress treated him with a kind of distant respect that he'd grown accustomed to. They knew he was former military, knew the broad outlines of his service without knowing the specifics, and they gave him the space that civilians often give to veterans, a mix of gratitude and uncertainty about how to relate to someone who had seen and done things beyond their experience. Danny didn't mind the distance. He wasn't looking for friends, wasn't looking to build connections that might complicate the simple life he was trying to create. He wanted to do his job, earn his paycheck, and be home in time to pick up Lily from the after-school program. But the meeting ran long, as meetings always did, and it was past noon by the time Danny found himself alone in his small office staring at his computer screen without really seeing it. Mike's call from the night before kept echoing in his mind, pulling his attention away from the spreadsheets and security protocols that were supposed to be his concern now. He picked up his phone and scrolled through his contacts until he found Mike's number. His thumb hovered over the call button for a long moment. Then he set the phone down and turned back to his computer. He was out. He told Mike he was out, and he meant it. Whatever was happening in Oceanside, whatever dark currents were running beneath the surface of this sunny coastal city, it wasn't his fight anymore. His only fight now was raising his daughter, keeping her safe, giving her the childhood she deserved. But even as he told himself, this part of him knew it wasn't true. Once a warrior, always a warrior. That's what his instructors had said way back at the beginning, when he was just a raw recruit struggling through buds, trying to survive the hell that would forge him into something new. They'd been right. The warrior never really went away. He just learned to sleep, to wait, to watch from behind the mask of an ordinary man living an ordinary life. The afternoon passed slowly. Danny finished his report, attended another meeting, ate a sandwich at his desk, while reviewing a proposal for a new client. By 4 o'clock, he was in his truck, navigating the familiar roads back to Oceanside, back to the school where Lily would be waiting for him in the after-school program, already working on her homework, or playing with the other kids who stayed late because their parents worked. He picked her up at 4:30 like he did every day, and she came running across the playground to meet him, her backpack bouncing against her small shoulders, her face alight with the special joy reserved for the end of the school day. She chattered the whole way to the truck, telling him about the math problems they'd worked on and the stories Sophie had told about her puppy and the new boy in class who didn't talk much, but had really cool sneakers. Danny listened to ask questions, laughed in all the right places, but behind his smile, his mind was working, processing the conversation with Mike, turning over the fragments of information like puzzle pieces that hadn't yet revealed their pattern. A trafficking ring in Oceanside, women disappearing. Someone was hunting in his territory, and even though he'd told Mike he was out, even though he'd sworn to focus on Lillian, nothing else, some part of him couldn't stop thinking about it. "We need to stop at the store, Bug." Danny glanced at his daughter in the rearview mirror. "You can help me pick out something for dinner." "Can we get ice cream?" Lily's voice was bright with hope. "We'll see. Depends on how good you are in the store. I'll be the best daddy, I promise." Danny smiled despite himself. He didn't doubt it. Lily was always the best, even when she was being her most stubborn, most difficult, most Jennifer-like self. She was the light in his life, the reason he got up in the morning, the anchor that kept him tethered to the world when the darkness inside him threatened to pull him under. He pulled into the parking lot of the Oceanside Gateway Shopping Center, a sprawling collection of retail stores anchored by a Target at one end and a grocery store at the other. The afternoon sun was still bright, casting long shadows across the asphalt, and the lot was moderately busy with shoppers finishing their errands before the dinner rush. Danny found a spot near the Target entrance and helped Lily out of her booster seat, taking her hand as they crossed the parking lot. The store was cool and bright, a welcome contrast to the heat outside. Danny grabbed a cart and let Lily sit in the child seat, pushing her up and down the aisles while she pointed out everything that caught her attention. They picked out ingredients for dinner spaghetti with meatballs because it was Lily's favorite, and Danny let her talk him into a box of cookies that he knew she'd make him share. In the toy aisle, she spotted a stuffed unicorn, purple with a silver horn, and turned those blue eyes on him with an expression that was pure, concentrated persuasion. "Please, Daddy, she's so pretty, and I'll take really good care of her, I promise." Danny looked at the unicorn, then at his daughter, then back at the unicorn. "You know you have about 10 unicorns at home already, but this one is special. Look at her face. She needs me, Daddy." He should have said no. He should have reminded her about saving money, about not buying things just because they were shiny and new. But Jennifer's voice was in his head, the voice that had always laughed at him for being too serious, too practical, too focused on the mission to enjoy the small pleasures of life. "Okay, Bug, but this is the last unicorn for a while, understand?" Lily's face erupted into a smile so bright it could have powered the whole store. "Thank you, Daddy. I'm going to name her Princess Starshine." "Of course you are." They checked out and headed back to the parking lot, Danny carrying 2 shopping bags in one hand and holding Lily's hand with the other. The afternoon sun was lower now, casting everything in golden light, and Lily was clutching her new unicorn, and chattering about what Princess Starshine would think of the other unicorns at home, whether they would be friends or if there would be drama. Danny was only half listening, his attention split between his daughter's words and the automatic threat assessment that had become second nature after 15 years in the teams. He scanned the parking lot without really thinking about it, noting the positions of vehicles, the movements of other shoppers, the spots where someone could hide if they wanted to. It was a habit one he'd tried to break and failed. Jennifer used to tease him about it, calling him her personal bodyguard, but she'd also appreciated it, had told him once that she felt safe with him in a way she'd never felt with anyone else. The memory stung, as memories of Jennifer always did, but before Danny could dwell on it, something caught his attention. A sound. A sharp cry cut short from somewhere across the parking lot. His body reacted before his conscious mind had time to process what he'd heard. His shoulders went back. His head came up. His eyes swept across the rows of cars, searching for the source of the sound with a precision that was pure muscle memory. There, maybe 60 yards away near a dark blue panel van, parked in an isolated section of the lot, partially hidden by two larger SUVs. 3 men and a woman. Danny's training took over cataloging details with mechanical efficiency. The woman was young, mid-20s, with long brown hair, in business casual clothing, black pants and a white blouse. One of the men had her by the arm and was dragging her toward the open side door of the van. She was fighting, trying to pull away, but he was too strong. A second man was on her other side, hurting her like an animal. The third stood near the driver's door, eyes sweeping the parking lot. A lookout. Abduction in progress. The words formed in Danny's mind with cold clarity. 3 hostiles, 1 victim. Limited time. His first instinct was pure operator instinct. Assess, plan, execute. Close the distance. Neutralize the threats. Secure the victim. He'd done it 100 times before in places where the stakes were higher and the enemies more dangerous. His body was already shifting weight forward, preparing to move. His second instinct was the one that came slower, but hit harder. You have Lily. She's right here beside you. This isn't your fight. Call 911 and keep your daughter safe. Danny pulled out his phone, his movements calm and controlled despite the adrenaline that was beginning to flood his system. He dialed 911, pressing the phone to his ear as he put himself between Lily and the scene across the parking lot. The operator's voice was brisk and professional. 911, what is your emergency? I'm at Oceanside Gateway Shopping Center main parking lot, southeast section, near the Target entrance. There's an abduction in progress. 3 male suspects, 1 female victim. Dark blue panel van, California plates. He rattled off the license plate number, his eyes never leaving the scene. The woman was still struggling, still trying to break free, but the men had her almost to the van now. In a few seconds, she'd be inside and then she'd be gone. Sir, officers are being dispatched. ETA approximately 6 minutes. Please do not engage. Stay on the line and keep watching if you can do so safely. 6 minutes. Danny felt the number like a physical blow. In 6 minutes, the woman would be inside that van, the van would be on the road, and no one would ever see her again. He knew how these things worked. He'd seen the intelligence reports, had read the case files that crossed his desk when he was still active. Victims of trafficking operations didn't get found. They disappeared into a void that swallowed them whole. The woman screamed again, a high, desperate sound that cut through the ambient noise of the parking lot, and that's when Lily saw it. Daddy! Her voice was high and thin with fear. Daddy, that man has a knife. Danny's eyes snapped back to the scene. One of the men, the one holding the woman's arm, had pulled a folding knife from his pocket and was pressing the blade against her ribs. The woman went rigid, her struggles ceasing instantly as the reality of the weapon sank in. Every tactical instinct in Danny's body screamed at him. Armed suspect, victim in immediate danger, window of opportunity closing. But the voice screaming loudest was the one that had been shaped by fatherhood, by the weight of responsibility for this small person who trusted him completely. You have Lily. You cannot risk her. Stay back. He looked down at his daughter. Her face was pale, her blue eyes wide with terror. She was clutching her new unicorn to her chest like a talisman, pressing herself against his leg as if trying to disappear into his shadow. She was scared, more scared than he'd ever seen her, and the sight of her fear did something to him that he couldn't quite name. But she wasn't just scared. She was also looking up at him. looking up at him with the kind of trust that only children can give, the absolute certainty that their parent can fix anything, stop anything, save anyone. And then she spoke. Daddy, her voice was shaking barely above a whisper. Please, help her. 4 words, just 4 words from a 7-year-old girl. But they shattered something inside Danny, some barrier he'd built between the man he'd been and the man he was trying to become. Because how could he look his daughter in the eye and teach her about right and wrong, about standing up for people who couldn't stand up for themselves if he turned away now? How could he tell her that some lives were worth risking everything for? That courage meant doing hard things when you were afraid if he let this woman be taken while he watched and did nothing. The operator's voice crackled in his ear. Sir, are you still there, sir? Danny made his choice. He knelt down in front of Lily, bringing himself to her eye level, his voice calm and steady despite everything roiling inside him. Bug, I need you to listen to me very carefully. See that lady over there, the one loading groceries into her car? He pointed to a middle-aged woman about 20 yards away, unaware of the drama unfolding across the lot. I need you to run to her right now and stay with her. Do not move until I come to get you. Do you understand? Lily's eyes welled with tears. Daddy? What are you, Lily? His voice was firm, but gentle. Right now, baby. Go. She went. Danny watched her run toward the woman, watched her small form cover the distance with the speed of fear, watched her reach safety. Then he dropped his phone to the ground, the 911 line still connected, and started walking toward the van. His body shifted into a mode he knew intimately, a state of being that had been drilled into him through years of training and combat. His breathing slowed and deepened. His heart rate dropped rather than rose, a counterintuitive response that only came with extensive conditioning. His vision sharpened, taking in details he hadn't consciously noticed before. The angles of approach, the positions of obstacles, the body language of the 3 men revealing their training or lack thereof. He covered the 60 yards in about 20 seconds, moving fast but not running, using the parked cars as concealment, approaching from the men's blind side. They were focused on the woman, on getting her into the van, and they didn't see him coming until it was too late. The engagement lasted 15 seconds. The lookout, the one near the driver's door, was the first to notice Danny. He was in his early 40s, stocky build, maybe 220 pounds, wearing a denim jacket. His eyes widened in surprise, then narrowed with suspicion. Hey man, you lost. His voice carried a false friendliness that did nothing to hide the threat beneath. Danny didn't answer. He didn't slow down. He just closed the remaining distance with the deliberate speed of a man who knew exactly what he was going to do. The lookout's hand moved toward his waistband, reaching for a weapon, but Danny was already inside his reach. His left hand shot out and caught the man's wrist before the gun could clear, trapping it against his body. His right hand came up in a short, brutal palm strike to the chin, snapping the man's head back with a crack that sounded like a branch breaking. Before the lookout could recover, Danny pivoted, using the man's own momentum against him, and drove his knee into the side of the man's leg. The joint buckled. The lookout went down hard, his head bouncing off the side of the van with a hollow thunk. 3 seconds. 1 down. The second man, the one in the gray hoodie, reacted faster than Danny expected. He released the woman and charged, hands reaching for Danny's throat. Danny sidestepped, caught the incoming arm, and executed a throw that used the man's own momentum to drive him into the ground. The impact sounded like a side of beef hitting a butcher's block. Danny followed up with a knee to the solar plexus, driving the air from the man's lungs and the consciousness from his brain. 8 seconds, 2 down. The third man, the one with the knife, finally processed what was happening. He shoved the woman aside. She stumbled and fell to her knees and turned to face Danny with the blade held low in a prison grip, edge up, ready to gut. Big mistake, hero. The man's voice was ugly with malice. Danny didn't respond. He just watched the knife, watched the man's stance, watched the subtle shifts in weight that would telegraph the attack before it came. It came fast, a straight thrust toward Danny's stomach. But Danny had seen 1,000 attacks like it had trained against them, until the response was as automatic as breathing. His hand blurred out, catching the man's wrist mid-thrust. He twisted hard and fast, applying a standing wrist lock that forced the fingers to open and the knife to drop. Before the weapon hit the ground, Danny's elbow was connecting with the man's face, breaking his nose in a spray of blood. The man staggered back and Danny followed, sweeping his legs and driving him face first into the van. 15 seconds, 3 down. Danny stood over the unconscious men, his breath coming hard but controlled. His hands were shaking now, the post-adrenaline tremors that came even to veterans who'd done this hundreds of times. He turned to the woman who was still on the ground, staring at him with wide, terrified eyes. "You okay?" He kept his voice steady. She nodded, unable to speak. "Stay down, police are coming." He turned and walked back toward where he'd left Lily, toward his daughter, who just watched her father become something she'd never seen before. She was standing with the middle-aged woman, clutching her unicorn, tears streaming down her face. The moment she saw Danny, she broke away and ran toward him, throwing herself into his arms with a force that nearly knocked him backward. "Daddy!" She sobbed into his chest. "Daddy! Daddy! Daddy! I'm okay, Bug." Danny held her tight, his arms wrapped around her small body, his face buried in her hair. "I'm okay. It's over." But even as he said the words, he knew they weren't entirely true. What had happened in the parking lot was only the beginning. The man he'd tried to bury, the warrior he'd locked away behind a mask of normalcy, had come roaring back to life. And now that mask had a crack in it, a crack that would only grow wider in the days to come. Behind him, sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. People were starting to gather, drawn by the commotion, some filming with their phones, others calling 911. The afternoon sun continued its descent, casting long shadows across the scene of violence, illuminating everything in stark golden light. Danny held his daughter and waited for the police and tried not to think about what came next. The Oceanside Police Department took statements for 2 hours. Danny sat in the back of a patrol car, with Lily asleep on his lap, exhausted by the trauma she'd witnessed and the tears she'd cried. The afternoon sun had set, replaced by the soft glow of streetlights and the harsh white of police flashlights moving through the parking lot. Yellow crime scene tape cordoned off the area around the van, and technicians in gloves were cataloging evidence with the careful precision of their trade. A detective named Roberto Vasquez came to sit with Danny after the first hour, a man in his 50s with silver-streaked hair and eyes that had seen too much to be surprised by anything. He asked Danny to walk through the events again from the beginning, and Danny complied, keeping his account factual and brief. Vasquez listened without interrupting, occasionally making notes in a small notebook. When Danny finished, the detective was quiet for a long moment. "Those were some moves back there, Mr. Reeves." He glanced at Danny with a mix of curiosity and respect. "You have any training, Navy?" Danny kept his voice neutral. "What kind of Navy?" "The kind where you learned to do what I did." Vasquez's eyes narrowed slightly, and Danny could see him making calculations, putting pieces together. After a moment, the detective nodded slowly. "SEAL," he said. It wasn't a question. Danny didn't confirm or deny, which was confirmation enough. "Well, you did good. That woman would be in the back of that van right now, heading God knows where, if you hadn't stepped in." Vasquez paused, glancing at Lily's sleeping form. "But you know you got lucky, right? 3 against 1. One of them armed with your kid right there. That could have gone south real fast." Danny looked down at his daughter, at the tear tracks still visible on her cheeks, at the way she clutched her stuffed unicorn even in sleep. "I know. Believe me, I know." Vasquez nodded and stood. "We've got your contact information. Detectives might have follow-up questions in the coming days. But for now, you're free to go. Get some rest. Take care of that little girl." Danny carried Lily to his truck and buckled her into her booster seat, being careful not to wake her. She stirred slightly as he climbed behind the wheel, but didn't open her eyes, just murmured something unintelligible and pressed her face against the window. The drive home was quiet, the streets of Oceanside slipping past in a blur of streetlights and shadows. Danny's mind was racing, replaying every second of the fight, cataloging every mistake he'd made, every risk he'd taken. He'd gotten lucky. Vasquez was right. Any number of things could have gone wrong. The lookout could have gotten his gun out. The knife could have found its target. One of the men could have had backup that Danny hadn't seen. And Lily had been right there watching her father become a weapon, become the thing he'd tried to leave behind. By the time he pulled into the driveway of their house, Lily was awake, blinking in the darkness of the cab. "Are we home, Daddy?" "We're home, Bug. Let's get you inside." He carried her upstairs and helped her change into her pajamas, the unicorn ones that matched her new stuffed toy. He tucked her into bed and sat on the edge of the mattress, smoothing her hair back from her face. "Daddy," her voice was small and uncertain. "Yeah, Bug. Those men, the bad men, they're not going to come here, are they?" Danny felt something twist in his chest. "No, baby. They're not going to come here. They're in jail now. They can't hurt anyone." Lily was quiet for a moment. Then you stopped them, didn't you? You kept that lady safe. I tried to. You were brave. Her eyes were solemn in the dim light of her nightlight, like the heroes in my stories. Danny didn't know what to say to that. He'd never thought of himself as a hero, not even during his years in the teams, not even when they'd given him medals and called him courageous. He was just a man who did what needed to be done, who went where he was told, and followed orders, and tried to bring his brothers home alive. Heroes were something else, something he'd never quite understood. But looking at his daughter now, at the trust and admiration in her eyes, he felt something shift inside him. Maybe that was what heroism was in the end. Not feeling brave, not being Bishop, but just doing the right thing. When the right thing needed to be done, even when you were scared, even when it cost you. Get some sleep, Bug. He leaned down and kissed her forehead. I love you. I love you too, Daddy. More than all the stars. It was something Jennifer used to say, something Lily had adopted as her own, and every time Danny heard it, he felt the ghost of his wife standing just behind him, watching over them both. He left the door open a crack, the way Lily liked, and went downstairs. The house was quiet, the only sounds the distant hum of traffic and the soft tick of the clock in the living room. Danny poured himself a glass of whiskey, then thought better of it, and poured it down the sink. He needed to stay sharp. He didn't know why he needed to stay sharp, not exactly, but something in his gut told him that tonight was not a night for dulled senses. He sat in his armchair in the living room in the darkness and stared at the wall without seeing it. His hands had stopped shaking, but he could still feel the echoes of adrenaline in his system, the heightened awareness that came from combat and took hours to fully fade. He thought about the woman he'd saved, about the terror in her eyes, about how close she'd come to disappearing forever. He thought about Mike's call, about the trafficking ring operating in Oceanside, about the 7 women who'd vanished in 2 years, and how that number might have become 8 today if Danny hadn't been there, if Lily hadn't begged him to help. It's connected. The thought surfaced in his mind with cold certainty. What happened today wasn't random. It's part of what Mike was warning me about. He should call Mike, should tell him what happened, give him the information about the 3 men in custody. But something held him back. A reluctance to be pulled back in, to let that world reclaim him after he'd worked so hard to break free. The hours passed. Danny sat in the darkness thinking, remembering, trying to find some way to process what had happened. At some point, exhaustion caught up with him, and he drifted into an uneasy sleep, still sitting in the armchair, still half alert even in unconsciousness. The dream came again, as it always did. Desert heat, smoke and blood. Tommy's eyes fading. But this time when Tommy spoke, his words were different. They're not going to stop, brother. They're coming for you now. You know that, don't you? You're in it, whether you want to be or not. Danny woke with a start. Heart pounding, the first gray light of dawn filtering through the windows. The knock on the door came at 8:30 in the morning. Danny had been awake for hours by then, had made coffee and breakfast, and gotten Lily ready for school, as if it were any normal day. But it wasn't a normal day. The events of the previous afternoon hung over everything, casting shadows that the morning sunlight couldn't dispel. 3 sharp knocks, spaced with military precision. Danny knew that knock. He'd heard it countless times in his career, announcing the arrival of someone with authority. He looked through the peephole and felt his stomach drop. Standing on his front porch was a man in a naval dress uniform. Not just any uniform, service dress, blues chest covered with ribbons, 2 silver stars on each shoulder board. A rear admiral. Danny opened the door slowly, keeping his expression neutral. Can I help you, sir? The admiral was in his late 50s, tall and fit, with iron gray hair and the bearing of a man accustomed to command. His eyes were sharp, assessing the eyes of someone who'd spent decades making life and death decisions. His name tag read RADMW Harrison, Chief Petty Officer Reeves. The admiral's voice was formal but not unfriendly. May I come in? Danny blinked. Sir, I'm retired. It's just Danny now. Once a SEAL, always a SEAL, Chief. May I come in? Danny stepped aside and the admiral entered. His gaze swept the modest living room with the quick, comprehensive assessment of a trained observer. The worn couch, the coffee table covered with Lily's coloring books, the framed photographs on the mantel, Danny in uniform with his teammates Jennifer, holding baby Lily, the family photo from before everything fell apart. Lily peeked around the corner from the kitchen, her eyes wide. Daddy, who's that? Go finish your breakfast, Bug. I'll be there in a minute. She disappeared and Danny turned back to face his visitor. Admiral Harrison met his gaze directly. Chief, I'm here because of what happened yesterday afternoon. The woman you saved. Her name is Lieutenant Rachel Harrison. She's my daughter. Danny nodded slowly, pieces falling into place. I figured as much, sir. I'm glad she's okay. She's okay because of you. The Admiral's voice softened slightly, a crack in his professional facade. I read the police report this morning. I also read your service record. SEAL Team 5, 12 years active duty. 3 combat deployments. Navy Cross 2 Silver Stars, Purple Heart. Medical retirement 3 years ago after injuries sustained during advanced training. Danny's jaw tightened. He didn't like being researched. Didn't like having his past laid out like cards on a table. Sir, with all due respect, why are you here? The Admiral reached into his uniform jacket and pulled out a business card. He handed it to Danny. I'm here because those 3 men you put in the hospital yesterday, they're not random criminals. They're part of a human trafficking ring that's been operating out of San Diego for the past 2 years. We've been tracking them. NCIS, FBI, local law enforcement. They've taken at least 7 women that we know of. None of them have been found. Danny felt the blood drain from his face. Mike's warning echoed in his mind, suddenly more urgent than it had been before. You're saying your daughter was targeted specifically? Yes. Rachel works in naval intelligence. She's been part of the task force investigating this ring. Somehow they identified her. Yesterday was an attempted kidnapping, but it was also a message. The Admiral's eyes hardened. A message that they can get to us wherever we are. Danny didn't respond. He was thinking, processing, connecting dots. You stopped them, and in doing so, you gave us something we didn't have before. 3 suspects in custody facing 25 years to life. They're already talking, trying to cut deals. The Admiral paused. Because of you, we're about to take down the entire operation. Danny looked at the business card in his hand. William T. Harrison, Rear Admiral, United States Navy. A phone number, an email address. Chief. The Admiral's voice brought his attention back. I came here for 2 reasons. The first is to thank you personally for saving my daughter's life. If you hadn't been there, if you hadn't acted, his voice cracked slightly, I would have lost her. Danny nodded. I'm glad I could help, sir, but I have a question. Go ahead. Why are you really here? Admiral Harrison smiled faintly, the smile of a man who appreciated directness. Because I want to offer you a job. Danny listened as the Admiral outlined the proposal. Contract work, short-term, 6 months at most, working with NCIS and FBI to take down the trafficking ring. His skills, his training, his experience all put to use in service of something that mattered. The pay was generous, the schedule was flexible, and the mission was just hunting down predators who preyed on the vulnerable, who destroyed lives without conscience or consequence. But Danny shook his head. Sir, I'm retired. I've got a daughter who needs me. I can't put myself in danger like that anymore. I understand. The Admiral's expression was patient. And I wouldn't ask if I didn't think you were the right person. But consider this. Those men targeted my daughter. What's to stop them from targeting yours? The words hit Danny like a physical blow. His hands clenched into fists at his sides. Are you threatening my daughter? No. I'm stating a fact. The Admiral's voice remained calm. These people don't care about rules. They don't care about consequences. If they think you're a threat, and after yesterday you most certainly are, they'll come after you. Or worse, they'll come after Lily to get to you. The best way to protect your daughter is to help us take them down. Permanently. Danny's mind raced. Everything in him wanted to refuse to shut the door to go back to the quiet life he'd been building. But the Admiral was right. He'd painted a target on himself yesterday, and that target might as well be painted on Lily's back. I need to think about it. That's fair. But I need an answer by tomorrow. The Admiral moved toward the door, then paused. One more thing. Rachel wanted me to give you this. He handed Danny a folded piece of paper. Then he was gone. Danny unfolded the paper with hands that weren't quite steady. It was a handwritten note, the words written in a careful, feminine script. Thank you for saving my life. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't been there. My father told me you have a daughter. I hope she knows how lucky she is to have a dad like you. If there's ever anything I can do for you, please don't hesitate to ask. You're a hero. Rachel. Danny stared at the note for a long time. He wasn't a hero. He was just a man who'd seen something wrong and hadn't been able to look away. But as he stood there in his quiet living room with the sounds of Lily finishing her breakfast drifting in from the kitchen, he couldn't help wondering if maybe that was what heroism really meant. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Danny went through the motions of normal life, drove Lily to school, went to work, attended meetings, reviewed reports, but his mind was elsewhere, churning through the implications of the Admiral's visit. That evening, after putting Lily to bed, Danny sat on his back porch with a beer. He wasn't drinking and stared at the darkness. His phone sat on the table beside him. Mike Torres' number pulled up on the screen. He should call. He knew he should call. Mike was already investigating this case. Mike could help him make sense of what was happening. But calling Mike meant stepping back into a world he'd left behind. It meant becoming the warrior again, the weapon, the man who moved through shadows and dealt in violence. It meant risking the life he'd built, the fragile peace he'd found with Lily. The phone rang, startling him. Mike's name on the caller ID. Danny answered. "Yo, Danny." Mike's voice was tight with tension. "I heard about what happened at the shopping center." "You okay?" "I'm fine." "How'd you hear news travels fast in our community, brother? Especially when one of our own goes full superhero in a parking lot." He paused. "Word is you took down 3 of Kessler's guys." Danny sat up straighter. "Kessler, Victor Kessler, the man behind the trafficking ring. Rich bastard, looks like a saint, donates to veterans charities, the whole 9 yards. But we've been building a case against him for 2 years. He's the one running this whole operation. And those men yesterday were his middle management, soldiers, the kind of guys who do the dirty work while Kessler keeps his hands clean. But you taking them down? Danny, that's put a spotlight on things. People are talking. Deals are being made." Mike's voice dropped. "Listen, brother, I need to tell you something. Something I should have told you a long time ago." Danny's grip tightened on the phone. What silence on the other end. "Then, you remember that training accident, the one that killed Tommy and ended your career every day?" "It wasn't an accident." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. "What are you talking about? I've been digging Danny for the past year, ever since I started working this case. And I found things, connections. Tommy was onto something before he died. He discovered that someone in our unit was feeding information to hostile elements, selling out missions for money." Danny's blood ran cold. He thought of Tommy's dying eyes, of the words he spoke in dreams. "It wasn't an accident, brother. You know that." Who Mike's hesitation was answer enough. "It was Hawk, wasn't it?" Danny's voice was flat, emotionless, even as fury burned in his chest. "James Hawkins." Another pause. "Then, we can't prove it. Not yet. But yeah, I think it was Hawk. I think Tommy figured out what Hawk was doing, and Hawk had him killed to protect himself. Hawk's dead." Danny's mind was racing. "Killed in Syria 5 years ago. That's what the record says. But I've been finding traces, Danny. Hints that Hawk might still be alive. And if he is, if he really did survive, there's only one reason he would have faked his death." Mike's voice hardened. "He's working for Kessler now, running security for the trafficking operation. And that means everything that happened to Tommy, everything that happened to you, it's all connected." Danny sat in the darkness, the phone pressed to his ear, his mind reeling. Tommy, the explosion, his shattered knee, the career he'd lost, all because of Hawk, his mentor, his brother in arms, the man he'd trusted with his life. "You there, Danny? I'm here." Danny's voice was barely a whisper. "What do you need from me?" "I need you to take that job the Admiral offered. Get inside the investigation. Help us build the case. And when we find Hawk," Mike's voice dropped lower, "when we find him, we finish this. Together." Danny looked through the glass doors into his dark house. Somewhere upstairs, Lily was sleeping, dreaming whatever dreams 7-year-olds dreamed. Safe, innocent, unaware of the storm that was gathering around them. He thought about Jennifer, about Tommy, about all the people he'd lost, all the ghosts that haunted his nights. And he made his decision. "I'll do it." The next morning, Danny called Admiral Harrison. "Sir, I'm in. 6 months. But I have conditions." "Name them." "If anything happens to me, you make sure Lily is taken care of. My mother lives in Arizona. If I don't make it through this, Lily goes to her. And I need your word that they'll be protected." "You have my word, Chief. And one more thing." Danny's voice hardened. "I want access to everything you have on Victor Kessler." "Everything." A long pause. Then, why do you want Kessler? Because I think he's connected to something from my past, something that cost me my best friend in my career. And I'm not stopping until I know the truth. Welcome to the team, Chief Reeves. Danny hung up and stood at his kitchen window, watching the morning light spread across Oceanside. Behind him, Lily was eating breakfast, humming a song she'd learned at school. Her voice was high and sweet and completely oblivious to the darkness that had just entered their lives. I'm sorry, Bug Danny thought. I'm sorry for what's coming. But I'm going to keep you safe, no matter what it costs. He turned away from the window and went to join his daughter for breakfast, wearing the mask of a normal father on a normal morning. But beneath that mask, the warrior was waking. The weapon was being sharpened. And somewhere out there, the men who had destroyed his life were about to learn what it meant to be hunted by a man with nothing left to lose. The days that followed Danny's decision felt like the calm before a storm he could sense but not yet see. He went through the motions of his old life, driving Lily to school, attending meetings at Fortress Security Solutions, cooking dinners, reading bedtime stories, but all of it felt like a performance, now a cover identity he was maintaining, while his real self prepared for war. Admiral Harrison moved quickly. Within 48 hours, Danny had been officially brought onto the Joint Task Force, given security clearances that opened doors he hadn't walked through in 3 years. He met with FBI agents, NCIS investigators, local detectives, all of them treating him with the careful respect afforded to someone with his reputation. They showed him case files, surveillance reports, intercepted communications. They walked him through 2 years of investigation, 2 years of chasing shadows and dead ends. And at the center of it all, like a spider at the heart of a web, was Victor Kessler. Danny studied the files on Kessler with the focused intensity he'd once brought to mission planning. The man was 55 years old, a real estate developer who had made his fortune in commercial properties across Southern California. On paper, he was a model citizen, a philanthropist who donated generously to veterans organizations and children's hospitals. He sat on the boards of charitable foundations. He hosted fundraising galas. He was photographed shaking hands with mayors and congressmen. But the investigation had peeled back the layers of that respectable facade. Behind the charity events and the political connections was a network of shell companies, offshore accounts, and shadowy associates. Money flowed through channels designed to be untraceable funding operations that left no paper trail. Women disappeared, and Kessler's fingerprints were on the edges of those disappearances, never quite close enough to prove but always there. The trafficking operation worked on a simple but effective model. Scouts identified targets, usually young women with limited family connections. Few people who would ask questions if they vanished. Snatch teams like the one Danny had encountered took the victims, transporting them to holding locations before they were moved overseas. The destinations varied: Eastern Europe, Southeast Asia, the Middle East. Once the women left American soil, they were gone, swallowed by an underworld that stretched across continents. It was a machine designed to consume human lives, and Victor Kessler was the one who kept it running. Danny absorbed all of this, filed it away, built a mental map of the enemy's terrain. But his focus kept returning to one aspect of the investigation, one name that appeared in the margins of the files: James Hawkins, Hawk. The official record said Hawk had died in Syria 5 years ago, killed during a covert operation that remained classified. His body had never been recovered, chalked up to the chaos of the battlefield. A star on the wall at Langley commemorated his sacrifice. His name was spoken with reverence in the teams, another brother lost in the endless war. But the more Danny dug, the more he found cracks in that narrative, inconsistencies in the after-action reports, witnesses whose stories didn't quite add up, a lack of forensic evidence that should have been present if Hawk had really died where and when the record claimed. And then there were the sightings, unverified, dismissed as unreliable, but persistent. Reports of a man matching Hawk's description appearing in places where Kessler's operations intersected with the darker corners of the world. Always in the background, always just out of focus, but there. Mike Torres had spent months following these threads before sharing them with Danny. The picture they painted was incomplete but damning. Hawk hadn't died in Syria. He'd walked away from his life, his identity, his country. And he'd done it because the alternative was facing justice for what he'd done: selling out his brothers, getting Tommy killed. And now, if Mike's intelligence was correct, Hawk was running security for Kessler's trafficking ring, using the skills the Navy had given him to protect an operation that destroyed innocent lives. The thought of it made Danny's blood boil, but he kept his anger contained, channeled it into focus and discipline. Rage was a luxury he couldn't afford. If he was going to bring down Kessler and Hawk, he needed to be cold, calculated, precise. 2 weeks after joining the task force, Danny got his first real break. One of the men he'd taken down in the parking lot, the one with the broken nose, agreed to cooperate in exchange for a reduced sentence. His name was Derek Sloan, a mid-level enforcer with a long criminal record and a detailed knowledge of Kessler's operation. Danny sat in on the interrogation, watching through one-way glass as FBI agents walked Sloan through what he knew. The picture that emerged was chilling in its scope. Kessler had been running his operation for nearly a decade, expanding steadily, building connections with criminal networks around the world. He had people in law enforcement, in local government, in the military. His reach extended further than anyone had realized. And yes, Sloan confirmed there was someone running security for Kessler, an American, a former special operations soldier who went by the name Ghost. The description matched Hawk. Danny left the observation room with his hands shaking, not from fear, but from the effort of controlling the rage that threatened to consume him. 3 years of nightmares, of guilt, of wondering what he could have done differently. 3 years of mourning Tommy, of believing his death was a senseless accident. And it had all been a lie. Tommy had been murdered by a man they'd both trusted with their lives. That night, Danny sat in the darkness of his living room after putting Lily to bed. He held the photo of his SEAL team, the one from the mantle, and stared at the faces of men who were mostly dead now. Tommy grinning like he always did, one arm thrown around Danny's shoulders. And there on the other side of the group was Hawk, James Hawkins, their leader, their mentor, the man who had taught them what it meant to be a warrior, a man who had betrayed everything they stood for. Danny traced his finger across Tommy's face in the photograph. "I'm going to find him, Tommy." He spoke the words aloud into the silence of his empty house. "I'm going to find him, and I'm going to make him pay for what he did to you." There was no answer, of course. Tommy was gone, had been gone for 3 years. But Danny could feel his presence, somehow could feel the weight of his friend's expectation. The mission was clear now. Take down Kessler, find Hawk, get justice for Tommy, and keep Lily safe through all of it. The weeks that followed were a blur of activity. Danny worked with the task force during the day, poring over intelligence, helping plan operations, lending his expertise to an investigation that was finally gaining momentum. At night, he was a father, cooking dinners, helping with homework, reading bedtime stories about princesses and dragons and brave knights who always won in the end. The dual life was exhausting, but Danny had done harder things. He'd operated on no sleep in hostile territory, had maintained covers under conditions that would break most men. Playing the role of ordinary dad while planning the takedown of a trafficking ring was just another mission, one where the stakes were higher than any he'd faced before. Lily noticed the change in him, even if she didn't understand it. She'd catch him staring into space, lost in thought, and she'd tug at his sleeve to pull him back. "Daddy, you're thinking again." "Sorry, Bug. Just got some work stuff on my mind." "Is it the bad men?" "The ones from the parking lot." Danny's heart clenched. "No, baby. Those men are in jail. They can't hurt anyone anymore. But there are other bad men, aren't there?" Lily's voice was small but knowing. "That's why you're always thinking. You're trying to stop them." Danny didn't know what to say. He wanted to lie to protect her from the darkness that he was wading through. But Lily had always been too perceptive for easy deceptions. "There are people in the world who do bad things." Danny spoke carefully, choosing his words. "And yes, I'm trying to help stop them. That's my job now, like a superhero." He smiled despite himself. "Something like that." Lily was quiet for a moment. "Then I'm glad you're a superhero, Daddy. But be careful, okay? I don't want you to get hurt." "I'll be careful, Bug. I promise." It was a promise he wasn't sure he could keep. But he made it anyway, because that's what fathers did. They promised safety. They couldn't guarantee protection. They might not be able to provide. They built walls around their children and prayed those walls would hold. The break came 6 weeks after Danny joined the task force. Intelligence indicated that Kessler was planning a major operation, a large shipment of women to be transported to a cargo vessel in Long Beach Harbor. It was the biggest move he'd made in years, and it represented an opportunity the task force couldn't pass up. But there were risks. Kessler would have security, serious security, which meant Hawk might be there. The harbor was large and hard to contain. If anything went wrong, Kessler could slip away and they might not get another chance. Danny threw himself into the planning with an intensity that surprised even the seasoned FBI agents on the team. He reviewed the layouts of the harbor, studied satellite imagery, developed contingency plans for a dozen different scenarios. He was the first one in the office each morning and the last one to leave at night. It was Mike Torres who finally called him on it. "You need to slow down, brother." Mike caught Danny in the parking lot after a late meeting, his voice concerned. "You're burning yourself out. When's the last time you slept more than 4 hours? I'll sleep when this is over." Mike grabbed his arm, forcing Danny to stop and face him. "This isn't about the mission, is it? This is about Hawk." Danny didn't answer, but his silence was answer enough. "I get it," Mike's voice softened. "What he did to Tommy, what he did to you, I want him to pay too. But you can't let revenge cloud your judgment. That's how people get killed." "I'm not looking for revenge." Danny's voice was flat, controlled. "I'm looking for justice." "Is there a difference?" Danny met his friend's eyes. "Ask Tommy." Mike held his gaze for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. "Just be careful, Danny. You've got a little girl at home who needs her father." "I know. That's why I'm doing this." He walked away, leaving Mike standing in the parking lot. The night air was cool against his face, and somewhere in the distance, he could hear the ocean. Lily was at home with a babysitter, probably already asleep, dreaming her innocent dreams. 2 more weeks, Danny thought. 2 more weeks, and this will be over. But as he drove home through the quiet streets of Oceanside, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was wrong, that the storm he'd been sensing was just beginning to gather, and when it finally broke, it would sweep away everything he'd built. The threat came 3 days before the operation was scheduled to go down. Danny was at the FBI field office in San Diego reviewing final preparations with the team when his phone buzzed with an incoming message. Unknown number. No text, just an image. He opened it and felt the world tilt beneath his feet. It was a photograph of Lily. She was walking home from school, her backpack bouncing against her shoulders, her blonde hair catching the afternoon light. The photo had been taken from a distance, but the quality was clear. She was alone, unaware that she was being watched, captured in a moment of innocent vulnerability. Beneath the image was a single line of text: "Stay out of what doesn't concern you." Danny's hands went cold. His vision narrowed to a tunnel, the edges going dark. He was vaguely aware of voices around him, of people asking if he was okay, but their words came from very far away. "They know." The thought cut through the shock with cold clarity. "They know about me, and they're threatening Lily." He was moving before he realized he'd made a decision, pushing through the door, sprinting to his truck, dialing Lily's school as he ran. The line rang again, and Danny's heart hammered against his ribs. "Oceanside Elementary. How may I help you, my daughter?" "Lily Reeves, 2nd grade. Is she still there? Is she safe?" A pause. "Let me check, sir." Danny could hear typing, could imagine the receptionist pulling up attendance records. "I'm showing that Lily was picked up about 20 minutes ago by her grandmother." Her grandmother. Danny's blood ran cold. Lily's grandmother lived in Arizona. There was no way she could have picked up Lily from school. "Who signed her out?" "A Margaret Reeves. She's listed as an emergency contact." Relief flooded through Danny, so intense it nearly buckled his knees. His mother. It was his mother. He ended the call and dialed his mother's number, hands shaking. "Danny, Margaret Reeves'" voice was warm, unconcerned. "What's wrong, Mom? Are you with Lily right now?" "Of course I am. I flew in this morning. I wanted to surprise you both. We're at your house." She paused. "Danny, what's going on?" "You sound upset. Don't leave the house." Danny's voice was sharp. "Lock the doors and don't let anyone in until I get there. Do you understand?" A long pause. "Then Danny, you're scaring me." "Just do it, Mom. Please. I'll explain when I get there." He drove home in a blur, running red lights, weaving through traffic with a recklessness that would have gotten him pulled over any other day. When he pulled into his driveway, he was out of the truck before the engine had fully stopped sprinting to the front door. His mother opened it before he could reach for his keys, her face drawn with worry. "Danny, what on earth?" He pushed past her into the house, his eyes sweeping the living room, the kitchen, searching for threats that weren't there. Daddy Lily came running from the kitchen, her face split by a huge grin. "Grandma's here. She came to visit us." Danny caught his daughter and swept her into his arms, holding her tight against his chest. Over her shoulder, he met his mother's eyes. "We need to talk," he said, "after she goes to bed." That night, with Lily safely asleep, Danny sat at the kitchen table with his mother and told her everything. Margaret Reeves was 67 years old, a small woman with silver hair and the same gray-blue eyes that Danny had inherited. She'd been a military wife for 30 years, had raised Danny on a series of bases across the country, while his father deployed to Vietnam, to the Gulf, to wherever the Navy sent him. She understood the world her son had lived in. She understood sacrifice and duty and the cost of both. She listened without interrupting as Danny explained about the trafficking ring, about Kessler, about the threat against Lily. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "So what are you going to do?" "I'm going to send Lily to stay with you in Arizona." Danny's voice was flat, drained of emotion. "Just until this is over, a few weeks at most, and then I'm going to finish this, one way or another." Margaret reached across the table and took her son's hand. "You're so much like your father, you know. He was the same way. When something threatened his family, nothing could stop him. Dad was a good man, so are you, Danny." Margaret squeezed his hand. "But don't lose yourself in this. Don't become something you'll regret." Danny thought about Hawk, about the man he'd trusted who had betrayed everything, about Tommy dying in his arms, about the rage that burned in his chest like a living thing. "I'll try, Mom." It was the most he could promise. The next morning, Danny told Lily about the trip to Arizona. He'd rehearsed the conversation in his head a dozen times, trying to find words that would make sense to a 7-year-old. In the end, he settled for simplicity. "You're going to spend some time with Grandma Bug, a little vacation." Lily's face fell. "But I don't want to leave. What about school? What about Sophie?" "You'll just miss a few weeks," Danny forced a smile. "And Grandma has horses, remember? You always wanted to learn to ride." "But what about you, Daddy?" Lily's voice was small. "Aren't you coming?" Danny's throat tightened. "I can't, Bug. Not right now. I have some work I need to finish here." "The bad men." Lily's eyes were too knowing, too old. "You're going to fight them, aren't you?" Danny wanted to lie to spare her this, but he'd always promised himself he'd never lie to his daughter about the things that mattered. "I'm going to stop them." "Yes, so they can't hurt anyone else." Lily was quiet for a long moment. Then she threw her arms around his neck. "You'll be careful. You promise, I promise, Bug. And you'll come get me when it's done. But as soon as it's done, I'll be on the first plane to Arizona." Lily pulled back and looked at him with those blue eyes that were so much like her mother's. "I love you, Daddy. More than all the stars. I love you too, Bug. More than anything in the whole universe." He held her for a long time, memorizing the feel of her small body in his arms, the smell of her shampoo, the way she fit against him like she was made to be there. Then he let her go and helped her pack her suitcase. The drive to the airport was quiet. Lily sat in the back seat, clutching her stuffed unicorn, watching the California landscape slide past the windows. At the terminal, Danny hugged his mother and daughter one last time. "Take care of her, Mom. I always do." Margaret's eyes were fierce. "And you take care of yourself. Come back to us, Danny." "I will." He watched them walk through the security checkpoint. Watched Lily turn to wave one last time, her small hand raised in farewell. Then they were gone, swallowed by the crowds, and Danny was alone. He stood in the terminal for several minutes, staring at the place where they disappeared. Then he turned and walked back to his truck. The mission was all that remained now. The days before the operation were the longest of Danny's life. He threw himself into preparation with a focus that bordered on obsession, reviewing every detail, anticipating every possible complication. The threat against Lily had changed something in him, had stripped away any lingering hesitation or doubt. This was no longer about justice or closure. This was about survival. Kessler had made it personal, and Danny would make him regret it. Mike Torres stayed close, watching Danny with the concern of a brother who knew the signs of a man walking too close to the edge. "You sure you're ready for this?" Mike asked the night before the operation, as they sat in the task force's staging area reviewing final plans. "I've been ready for 3 years. That's what worries me." Mike leaned forward. "Danny, listen to me. If Hawk is there, if you come face to face with the man who killed Tommy, you can't let emotion take over. We need him alive. He's the key to bringing down Kessler's entire network." Danny met his friend's eyes. "I know. Do you? Because I know what you're feeling right now. I've felt it too. But if you kill Hawk instead of capturing him, if you let vengeance override the mission—" "I said I know." Danny's voice was hard. "I'll do what needs to be done." Mike held his gaze for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. Okay, I trust you. Just remember why we're here. Remember who we're fighting for. Danny thought of Lily safe in Arizona waiting for him to come home. He thought of Tommy, 3 years dead, unavenged. He thought of the 9 women who might be in that harbor tomorrow night, facing a fate worse than death. I remember, the night of the operation was cool and foggy, a marine layer rolling in from the ocean to shroud Long Beach Harbor in gray mist. Danny moved through the shadows with the silent precision of a man who had spent half his life in darkness. His body felt different, sharper, more alive. The warrior was fully awake now, and the ordinary father who made pancakes and braided hair seemed like a distant memory. The task force had divided into teams approaching the target warehouse from multiple angles. FBI agents, NCIS investigators, local SWAT, all coordinating through encrypted radios, all focused on the same objective. Intel indicated that the women were being held in Warehouse 47, awaiting transfer to a cargo ship scheduled to depart at midnight. And somewhere in that warehouse, protected by Kessler's security, was Hawk. Danny's team approached from the east using the rows of shipping containers for cover. The fog swirled around them, muffling sounds, playing tricks with visibility. Danny's every sense was heightened, cataloging threats, mapping the terrain, processing information with the cold efficiency of training. They reached their position and held waiting for the signal. Danny could see the warehouse ahead, lights glowing through the fog, shadows moving behind the windows. Armed guards at the entrance, professional and alert. This wasn't going to be a clean operation. People were going to get hurt. Danny didn't care. Not tonight. The signal came, a burst of static on the radio followed by the code word. Execute. Everything happened at once. Flashbang grenades shattered the night. Brilliant bursts of light and sound designed to disorient and confuse. The teams moved as one, converging on the warehouse from all directions. Gunfire erupted, short controlled bursts, as the guards responded to the assault. Danny was through the east entrance before the echoes of the first shots had faded. His weapon was up, his movements fluid and precise. 1 guard down. 2. He advanced through the warehouse, clearing corners, neutralizing threats, moving deeper into the building. And then he saw him. Hawk. The man was standing at the far end of the warehouse near a door that led to the docks. He was older than Danny remembered, his hair, now fully gray, his face lined with years of hard living. But his stance was the same, that easy readiness of a predator at rest, and his eyes were the same, too cold, calculating, devoid of anything resembling conscience. Danny stopped. The chaos of the assault faded around him, the gunfire and shouting becoming distant background noise. All he could see was Hawk. All he could feel was the rage that had been building for 3 years. Hawk saw him too. His eyes widened with recognition, then narrowed with something that might have been respect. Danny Reeves. His voice was calm, almost amused. I wondered when you'd come for me. You killed Tommy. Danny's voice was steady, but his grip on his weapon was white-knuckled. You killed my brother. Tommy was weak. He was going to expose everything I'd built. Hawk shrugged as if discussing the weather. I did what had to be done. Danny felt something snap inside him. All the control he'd maintained, all the discipline he'd practiced, crumbled in the face of Hawk's casual dismissal of Tommy's life. He raised his weapon. Don't. Hawk's voice was sharp now, all amusement gone. You shoot me and you'll never find out the truth. About Tommy, about the operation, about what really happened that day in Nevada. Danny's finger rested on the trigger. 1 squeeze. That's all it would take. Justice for Tommy, an end to the nightmares. But Mike's words echoed in his head. We need him alive. He's the key to bringing down Kessler's entire network. And something else. A memory. Lily's face looking up at him in the parking lot that day. The trust in her eyes. The belief that her father was a good man. What would Lily think if she knew her father had executed an unarmed man in cold blood? Danny lowered his weapon. You're under arrest. His voice was flat, empty. For the murder of Thomas Chen, for conspiracy to commit human trafficking, for treason against the United States. Hawk's eyes flickered with something that might have been surprise. Then he smiled. You've gone soft, Danny. The teams would be ashamed, maybe, but I can live with myself. He signaled to the team members who had caught up with him, and they moved forward to secure Hawk. As they cuffed him and led him away, Danny stood in the warehouse watching, feeling the adrenaline fade and something else take its place. Not satisfaction, not relief, just a cold, empty certainty that the mission was done. The operation was a success. 17 arrests, 9 women rescued. Victor Kessler taken into custody, his empire crumbling around him. The trafficking ring that had terrorized Southern California for a decade was finished. Danny watched from the edges as the scene was processed and ambulances took the rescued women to hospitals, as Kessler was led away in handcuffs, his face a mask of impotent fury. He should have felt triumph, should have felt the satisfaction of a mission accomplished. Instead, he felt hollow. Mike found him standing by the water, staring out at the dark expanse of the harbor. "It's over, brother." Mike's voice was quiet. "We did it, yeah." Danny didn't turn around. "We did. You okay?" Danny thought about the question. Was he okay? He'd spent 3 years haunted by Tommy's death, by the belief that it was an accident, a cruel twist of fate. Now he knew the truth, and somehow the truth was worse. Tommy hadn't died because of bad luck or equipment failure. He died because a man he trusted had murdered him, and Danny had let that man live. "I don't know," he said finally. "I don't know if I'll ever be okay again." Mike stepped up beside him, shoulder to shoulder. "You did the right thing, not pulling that trigger. That took more strength than anything else you did tonight." "Did it? Or did I just fail Tommy again?" "You didn't fail anyone, Danny. You honored him. You brought his killer to justice the right way. Tommy would be proud of you." Danny closed his eyes. He could almost hear Tommy's voice, that familiar wry humor, telling him to stop being so dramatic and buy him a beer already. Maybe, Danny said, maybe he would. They stood in silence for a long time, watching the fog roll across the water. Finally, Mike spoke again. "So what now?" Danny opened his eyes. The first hint of dawn was appearing on the eastern horizon, pale light beginning to push back the darkness. "Now I go home. Now I get my daughter." And after that, Danny thought about it. About Lily waiting for him in Arizona. About the life he'd tried to build, the normalcy he'd craved. About the warrior inside him that never really slept. A friend once told me that the fight never ends, it just changes shape. Danny turned to face Mike. "I think I'm starting to understand what he meant." Mike nodded slowly. "And what shape does the fight take now?" Danny thought about the men and women he'd met during this mission. The agents and investigators who worked tirelessly to protect the innocent. The veterans he knew, the ones who'd come home from war and struggled to find their place in a world that didn't understand them. There are a lot of people out there like me. Veterans who feel lost, who don't know what to do with the skills they have. Danny's voice gained strength as the idea took shape. Maybe I can help them find their way. Give them a new mission. A training program, something like that. A way to channel what we learn, to use it for good. To keep fighting even after we hang up the uniform. Mike smiled, the first genuine smile Danny had seen from him in weeks. "That sounds like a damn good idea, brother." The sun was rising now. Golden light spilling across the harbor, burning away the fog. Danny watched it for a moment, feeling something he hadn't felt in a long time. "Hope. Let's go," he said. "I've got a plane to catch." The flight to Arizona felt longer than it should have. Danny sat in his window seat watching the California coastline shrink below him, giving way to the brown and ochre expanse of the desert. He'd barely slept in the 48 hours since the operation, but his mind was too restless for sleep now. Too many thoughts, too many emotions, all tangled together in a knot he couldn't yet untie. Hawk was in federal custody, awaiting trial for murder, treason, and a dozen other charges. He'd likely spend the rest of his life in prison, assuming he wasn't executed for treason. It was justice, the kind Danny had once believed in, the kind the system was supposed to deliver. But it didn't feel like enough. Tommy was still dead. The hole he'd left in Danny's life was still there, would always be there. Justice couldn't fill it. Revenge wouldn't have filled it either. Nothing could bring back the friend who'd been more like a brother, who'd saved Danny's life more times than either of them could count. All Danny could do was carry on. Live the life Tommy no longer could. Be the father Lily deserved. He landed in Phoenix and rented a car, driving north toward the small town where his mother lived. The desert stretched around him, vast and empty and somehow peaceful. He rolled down the window and let the dry air wash over him, feeling the tension begin to drain from his shoulders. His mother's house was a modest adobe structure on the outskirts of town, surrounded by cactus and mesquite. Danny pulled into the gravel driveway and sat for a moment, just looking at it. Somewhere inside, Lily was waiting. He got out of the car and walked to the front door. Before he could knock, it flew open. "Daddy." Lily launched herself at him with all the force her small body could muster. Danny caught her and swept her into his arms, burying his face in her hair, breathing in the familiar smell of her shampoo. "I missed you, Bug." His voice was thick. "I missed you too, Daddy. More than all the stars." He held her for a long time, longer than he probably should have, but she didn't complain. She just held on her arms wrapped around his neck, her face pressed against his shoulder. When he finally set her down, his mother was standing in the doorway watching them with tears in her eyes. "It's over," she asked quietly. "It's over." Margaret nodded. "Then you'd better come inside. Dinner's almost ready." That evening, sitting at his mother's table with Lily chattering about the horses and the friends she'd made and all the adventures she'd had, Danny felt something shift inside him. The weight he'd been carrying for 3 years was still there, but it was lighter now, manageable. He'd done what he set out to do. He'd brought down the men who had taken Tommy from him. He'd rescued innocent women from a fate worse than death. He'd kept his daughter safe. And now maybe he could start to heal. After dinner, he tucked Lily into bed in the guest room, reading her a story about a brave knight who fought dragons and saved kingdoms. When her eyes finally closed and her breathing deepened, he sat beside her for a long time watching her sleep. She was so much like Jennifer. The same golden hair, the same stubborn chin, the same smile that could light up a room. And underneath all of that, she had something that was purely her own. A resilience, a brightness, a capacity for joy that had survived the loss of her mother and the chaos of the past few weeks. She was going to be okay. They both were. Danny bent and kissed his daughter's forehead. "I love you, Bug," he whispered. "I'll always keep you safe." He stood and walked to the window, looking out at the desert night. The stars were brilliant here, far from the light pollution of the coast scattered across the sky like diamonds on velvet. Somewhere out there, Tommy was watching. Danny was sure of it. Watching and smiling and telling Danny in that wry voice to stop being so sappy and go get some sleep already. Danny smiled, the first real smile he'd allowed himself in weeks. "Okay, Tommy," he said softly. "Okay." He went to bed, and for the first time in 3 years, slept without dreaming. The morning sun came through the window, warm and golden, and Danny woke to the sound of Lily's laughter. He lay there for a moment just listening, letting the sound wash over him. Then he got up and went to join his family for breakfast. The road ahead was uncertain. There was still work to be done, a program to build veterans to help. There would be more fights, more challenges, more moments when the darkness threatened to overwhelm the light. But for now, in this moment, Danny had everything he needed: his daughter, his mother, the memory of the people he'd loved and lost carried with him always, and the knowledge that some battles are worth fighting no matter the cost. He sat down at the table, poured himself a cup of coffee, and smiled as Lily told him about the dream she'd had, something about unicorns and rainbows and a daddy who could fly. "That sounds like a great dream, Bug." "It was." She beamed at him. "But this is better. Being here with you is the best." Danny reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "Yeah, Bug, it really is." Outside, the sun continued to rise, painting the desert in shades of gold and rose. A new day was beginning, and for Daniel Reeves, a new chapter of his life was just starting to be written. The weeks following Danny's decision to join the task force felt like stepping through a door he had long kept locked. Every morning he woke before dawn in the small house on Cassidy Street, made breakfast for Lily, braided her hair with hands that had been trained to kill, and walked her to the bus stop with a smile that hid the storm gathering inside him. Then he would drive to the FBI field office in San Diego and become someone else entirely, shedding the skin of the ordinary father and putting on the armor of the warrior he had never truly stopped being. The task force operated out of a converted warehouse space on the edge of the naval base, a maze of cubicles and conference rooms filled with whiteboards covered in photographs and red string connecting names and locations. Danny spent his first week absorbing information, reading through case files that stretched back years, learning the shape of the enemy he had chosen to fight. Victor Kessler's organization was larger and more sophisticated than anyone had initially realized, a hydra with tentacles reaching into legitimate businesses, law enforcement, even elements of the military. Every time they cut off one head, another seemed to grow in its place. The agents Danny worked with treated him with a mixture of respect and wariness. They knew his reputation, knew the things he had done in places that didn't appear on any official record, and that knowledge created a barrier that was difficult to cross. He didn't mind the distance. He wasn't there to make friends. He was there to find Hawk and make him answer for what he had done to Tommy. Mike Torres served as his anchor during those first difficult weeks, the only person who understood both the man Danny had been and the man he was trying to become. They met for beers after long days of briefings and surveillance, sitting in quiet corners of anonymous bars while Danny processed the cascade of information that threatened to overwhelm him. The operation is bigger than we thought. Danny stared at his untouched drink condensation running down the glass like tears. Kessler has people everywhere. Cops, customs agents, even a couple of officers at Pendleton. How do we fight something that's infiltrated everything? Mike leaned back in his chair, his dark eyes reflecting the dim bar lights. One step at a time, brother. We follow the money, we track the movements, we build the case. That's how these things work. It's not like the old days when we could just kick down a door and start shooting. Danny knew his friend was right, but patience had never been his strongest virtue. In the teams, problems were solved with speed and violence, with direct action that left no room for ambiguity. This world of subpoenas and surveillance of legal procedures and chain of custody felt like fighting with one hand tied behind his back. But he adapted. He always adapted. That was what SEALs did. The first month passed in a blur of intelligence briefings and reconnaissance missions. Danny drove the streets of San Diego and its surrounding cities, memorizing the locations of Kessler's properties, identifying the patterns of his security teams, cataloging the faces of the men who moved in and out of his orbit. He sat in unmarked cars for hours at a time, watching and waiting, becoming invisible in the way only someone with his training could manage. At night, he went home to Lily. He helped with homework and cooked dinners and read bedtime stories, maintaining the fiction of normalcy, even as the darkness of his other life pressed in from all sides. Sometimes Lily would look at him with those two knowing eyes, and Danny would wonder how much she sensed, how much the perceptive mind behind that innocent face understood about the changes in her father. One evening, about 3 weeks into the operation, Lily asked a question that stopped Danny cold. "Daddy, why do you look at your phone so much now?" Danny glanced down at the device in his hand, at the encrypted message from the task force that he had been reading while she played with her toys. He hadn't realized she was watching. "Just work stuff, bug. Nothing important." But Lily shook her head, her expression serious beyond her years. "You never used to look at your phone like that, like you're scared of what it might say." Danny set the phone down and crossed the room to where his daughter sat, surrounded by stuffed animals and coloring books. He knelt beside her, bringing himself to her eye level, the way he always did for important conversations. "I'm not scared, baby. I'm just busy. There's a big project at work, and I need to pay attention to it. Is it dangerous?" The question hung in the air between them, loaded with implications that a 7-year-old shouldn't have to contemplate. Danny considered lying, considered wrapping the truth in comfortable fictions that would let her keep believing in a world where fathers didn't face mortal threats. But he had promised himself he would never lie to her about the things that mattered. It might be. Danny chose his words carefully. "There are some bad people that I'm trying to stop, and sometimes stopping bad people can be dangerous. Like the men in the parking lot, like those men, yes. But I'm being very careful, Lily, and I have friends helping me. Good people who know how to handle situations like this." Lily was quiet for a long moment. Then she reached out and took his hand, her small fingers wrapping around his scarred knuckles with surprising strength. "I don't want you to get hurt, Daddy. I know, Bug. I don't want that either. That's why I'm being so careful. Promise me." Her blue eyes were fierce. "Promise me you'll come home." Danny felt his throat tighten. He thought about all the promises he had made in his life, the ones he had kept and the ones that had been broken by circumstances beyond his control. He thought about Jennifer, about the future they had planned together, about all the promises that death had rendered meaningless. But he looked at his daughter, at the trust in her eyes, and he made the only promise he could. "I promise I'll do everything in my power to come home to you every single day." It wasn't a guarantee. It couldn't be. But it was the truth, and that would have to be enough. The second month brought the first real breakthrough. One of the suspects from the parking lot incident, a man named Derek Sloan, agreed to cooperate with the investigation in exchange for a reduced sentence. The FBI brought Danny in for the debriefing, recognizing that his background gave him unique insight into the kind of information Sloan might provide. Danny sat in the observation room watching through one-way glass as two agents walked Sloan through the structure of Kessler's organization. The man was nervous, sweating under the harsh fluorescent lights. But he talked. He talked for hours, painting a picture of an operation that was more extensive and more brutal than even the most pessimistic estimates had suggested. Kessler had been running his trafficking network for nearly a decade, Sloan explained. He had started small, targeting vulnerable women with no family connections, no one who would ask questions when they disappeared. But success had bred ambition, and ambition had led to expansion. Now Kessler's reach extended from California to Arizona to Nevada, with connections to criminal networks that spanned the globe. The women he took were transported through a series of safe houses, moved at night, kept drugged and compliant until they could be loaded onto cargo ships bound for destinations overseas. Some went to Eastern Europe, where they disappeared into a world of forced prostitution and slavery. Others went to the Middle East, sold to wealthy buyers who treated human beings as commodities. A few, the ones deemed most valuable, were auctioned to the highest bidder through encrypted channels on the dark web. Danny listened to all of this with a face carved from stone, but inside his rage was building like pressure in a sealed container. These weren't statistics or case numbers. They were people, women with names and families and dreams reduced to merchandise by men who saw them as nothing more than profit margins. And then Sloan mentioned something that made Danny's blood run cold. "There's someone at the top of security." Sloan's voice was barely above a whisper. "An American former military special operations. They call him Ghost. Nobody knows his real name, but he runs all the protection for the major shipments. Kessler trusts him completely." One of the agents leaned forward. "Can you describe this?" Ghost Sloan nodded. "Older guy, maybe late 50s, early 60s. Gray hair, keeps it short. Built like a fighter, you know. Moves like he knows exactly how to hurt you. There's something wrong with his eyes, though. Empty, like there's nothing behind them." Danny's hands were shaking. He pressed them flat against his thighs, forcing himself to remain still, to keep his expression neutral. But his mind was racing, connecting dots that formed a picture he had been dreading since Mike first mentioned the possibility. The description matched Hawk. James Hawkins, his former mentor, the man who had taught him what it meant to be a SEAL, the man who had killed Tommy. After the debriefing, Danny found a quiet corner of the building and called Mike. "It's him." Danny's voice was steady, but his heart was pounding. "Ghost is Hawk. I'm sure of it. Danny, we can't be certain based on a description alone." "I know it's him." The empty eyes, Mike. "That's what everyone always said about Hawk after Syria. Like something in him died over there." Danny paused, forcing himself to breathe. Or like he stopped, pretending to be human. Mike was silent for a long moment. "If you're right, this changes everything. Hawk knows our tactics, our procedures. He knows how we think, how we operate. Taking him down is going to be 10 times harder than we planned." "I know, but it also gives us an advantage." "How so?" "Because I know him too. I trained with him for years. I know how he moves, how he fights, how he plans." Danny's voice hardened, "And he thinks I'm still the same person I was when he knew me. He doesn't know what I've become." The third month was when everything accelerated. Intelligence indicated that Kessler was planning something big, a major shipment that would move more women at once than any previous operation. The task force went into overdrive, pulling resources from multiple agencies, coordinating surveillance and infiltration efforts across 3 states. Danny found himself working 18-hour days, sleeping in his office more often than his own bed, pushing himself to the limits of human endurance. Lily noticed. Of course she noticed. She was too smart, too perceptive to miss the way her father was slowly disappearing into his work. One night, Danny came home at midnight to find his mother sitting in the living room, a cup of tea cooling on the table beside her. Margaret had flown in from Arizona the week before, ostensibly to help with Lily while Danny was so busy, but he suspected her real purpose was to keep an eye on him. "She's asleep." Margaret's voice was soft. "Cried herself to sleep, actually. She thinks you're going to leave her like her mother did." Danny felt the words like a physical blow. He sank onto the couch across from his mother, suddenly aware of how exhausted he was, how close to breaking. "I'm not leaving her, Mom. I'm trying to protect her." "By never being here," Margaret's tone was gentle but pointed. "Danny, I understand what you're doing. I lived it with your father for 30 years. The missions, the secrets, the long absences. But you have to understand what it does to a child. The fear, the uncertainty, never knowing if this time will be the time Daddy doesn't come home." Danny looked at his hands, at the scars and calluses that mapped his history as a warrior. He thought about Lily crying herself to sleep, about the fear in her eyes when she asked him to promise he would come home. What am I supposed to do? Just walk away. Let these people keep hurting innocent women while I sit on the sidelines. Margaret reached across and took his hands in hers. No. You do what you have to do. That's who you are, and I wouldn't ask you to be anything else. But you make sure that little girl knows she's not alone. You make sure she understands that no matter what happens, she is loved. She is loved, more than anything in the world. Then show her. Margaret squeezed his hands. Words are important, Danny, but actions are what children remember. The next day, Danny took Lily out of school early. They went to the beach, just the two of them, and built sandcastles until the tide came in and washed them away. They ate ice cream for lunch and watched the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. And when Lily fell asleep that night, it was with a smile on her face instead of tears on her cheeks. Danny sat beside her bed watching her sleep and made himself another promise. Whatever happened in the days to come, whatever he had to do to bring down Kessler and Hawk, he would not let it destroy the relationship he had with his daughter. She was the light in his darkness, the reason he fought to be something more than a weapon. If he lost that, if he let the mission consume him completely, then the enemy had already won. The threat came without warning. Danny was in a task force meeting reviewing the final plans for the operation when his phone buzzed with an incoming message. Unknown number. No text, just an image. He opened it and the world stopped. Lily, his daughter walking home from school, caught in a moment of innocent vulnerability by someone who had been watching, waiting, documenting. The message beneath the image was simple and brutal. Stay out of what doesn't concern you. Danny's reaction was immediate and visceral. He was on his feet before he realized he had moved his chair, crashing backward, his hand reaching for a weapon that wasn't there. The other agents in the room turned to stare at him, alarm on their faces, but Danny didn't see them. He saw only the photograph, his daughter's face, the implicit threat that turned his blood to ice. He made calls. To the school confirming Lily was safe. To his mother instructing her to lock the doors and stay inside. To Mike, his voice shaking with a rage he could barely contain. They know about Lily. The words came out as a growl. Kessler knows about her, and he's using her against me. Mike's response was immediate. We need to move her. Get her out of California somewhere they can't reach. Danny's mind was already racing, calculating options, assessing risks. His mother's house in Arizona was the obvious choice, far from Kessler's base of operations, protected by distance and anonymity. I'll send her to my mother's, tonight. What about you? The question hung in the air. Danny knew what Mike was really asking. Would he continue the mission knowing that his involvement had put his daughter in danger? Would he be able to function, to focus with Lily's safety hanging over him like a sword? I'm not stopping. Danny's voice was hard as iron. Kessler just made this personal. He threatened my daughter. Now I'm going to burn his entire operation to the ground. That night, Danny sat Lily down and explained that she was going on a trip to visit Grandma. He kept his voice light, his face cheerful, but he could see that she wasn't fooled. She was too smart, had seen too much of his fear to believe this was just a vacation. It's because of the bad men, isn't it? Her voice was small. They found out about me. Danny couldn't lie, not to her, not about this. Yes, Bug, some bad people know where we live, and I need to make sure you're safe while I deal with them. Lily's lower lip trembled, but she didn't cry. Instead, she climbed into his lap and wrapped her arms around his neck, holding on with all the strength her small body possessed. You're going to fight them, aren't you, Daddy? Yes, and you might get hurt. Danny's heart broke at the matter-of-fact way she said it, at the understanding that no 7-year-old should have to possess. I might, but I'm going to try very hard not to. Lily pulled back and looked at him with those blue eyes so like her mother's, filled with a wisdom beyond her years. You have to promise me something, Daddy. What's that, Bug? Promise me you'll win. Promise me you'll beat the bad men and come back to me. Danny thought about all the battles he had fought, all the enemies he had faced. He thought about Hawk and Kessler and the darkness that waited for him in the days ahead. He thought about the uncertainty that was the only constant in the life of a warrior. But he looked at his daughter, at the faith in her eyes, and he made the only promise that mattered. I promise, Lily. I promise I'll come back to you. The airport was a blur of crowds and announcements, and the endless shuffle of travelers moving from one place to another. Danny walked with Lily on one side and his mother on the other, carrying bags and checking tickets and doing all the ordinary things that ordinary families did when saying goodbye. At the security checkpoint, Danny knelt down and hugged his daughter one last time. He breathed in the smell of her shampoo, felt the press of her small arms around his neck, tried to memorize every detail of this moment in case it was the last. I love you, Bug, more than anything in the whole universe. I love you too, Daddy, more than all the stars. They held each other for a long time, neither wanting to be the first to let go. Finally, Margaret gently touched Danny's shoulder. We need to go, son. The flight won't wait. Danny released his daughter and stood at his eyes burning with tears he refused to let fall. Lily took her grandmother's hand and walked toward the security line, looking back over her shoulder with every step. At the threshold, she stopped and turned. Win, Daddy. Beat the bad guys and come home. Then she was gone, swallowed by the crowd, and Danny was alone. He stood in the terminal for a long time after they disappeared, staring at the space where his daughter had been. Around him, life continued, travelers rushing to gates, announcements blaring over speakers, the whole vast machinery of human movement grinding on without pause. But for Danny, the world had gone quiet. The noise faded into background static, and all he could hear was the sound of his own heartbeat, steady and strong, the rhythm of a war drum calling him to battle. He turned and walked out of the airport into the California sunlight toward the car that would take him back to San Diego. Back to the task force. Back to the mission that had become more than just a job. This was personal now. Kessler had made it personal when he threatened Lily, and Danny was going to make him pay. The house on Cassidy Street felt empty without Lily's laughter to fill it. Danny moved through the rooms like a ghost, gathering the things he would need for what lay ahead. Weapons, equipment, the tools of a trade he had never truly abandoned. In the bedroom, he opened the wooden box that held his medals and photographs. He looked at the faces of his team, at Tommy's grin, at Hawk's cold eyes. He looked at the note Tommy had written, the one that said it wasn't his fault. It wasn't an accident. Danny spoke the words aloud, letting them fill the empty house. It was never an accident, and now it's time for justice. He closed the box and put it away. Then he picked up his phone and called Mike. I'm ready. When do we move? 3 days. The intel says Kessler's shipment goes out on Thursday night. Then I'll be there. Danny, are you sure you're okay? You sound different. Different. Danny almost laughed. Yes, he supposed he was different. The last thing holding him back had been his fear for Lily, his need to protect her at all costs. Now she was safe beyond Kessler's reach, and the only thing left was the mission. I'm fine, Mike. Better than I've been in a long time. That's what worries me. Danny ended the call and stood in the darkness of his empty house. 3 days until the operation. 3 days until he faced Hawk. 3 days until everything he had been working toward came to its conclusion. He thought about Jennifer, about the future they had planned before death had stolen it away. He thought about Tommy, about the brotherhood they had shared, about the betrayal that had ended his life. He thought about Lily, safe in Arizona, trusting her father to keep his promise. And he thought about himself, about the man he had been and the man he had become. The ordinary father who made pancakes and braided hair. The warrior who moved through darkness and dealt in death. Two halves of the same person finally coming together into something whole. Danny Reeves walked to the window and looked out at the night sky. The stars were hidden by light pollution, but he knew they were there, burning in the darkness, constant and eternal. More than all the stars, Bug. Danny whispered the words into the empty room. That's how much I love you. Then he turned away from the window and began to prepare for war. The 3 days before the operation passed like water through clenched fingers, impossible to hold, impossible to stop. Danny spent them in preparation, transforming himself from the man who made pancakes and braided hair into something older and more dangerous. Something that had been sleeping inside him for 3 years and was now fully awake. He reviewed the operational plans until he could recite them from memory. The harbor layout, the positions of the teams, the timing of the assault. Every contingency, every backup plan, every possible point of failure. He ran through scenarios in his mind, imagining how Hawk would respond to each phase of the attack, anticipating the moves of an enemy who knew him as well as he knew himself. Mike Torres watched him with growing concern, recognizing the signs of a man who was preparing for more than just a mission. There was something final in Danny's preparations, something that spoke of endings rather than beginnings. You're not planning to die out there, are you? Mike caught Danny alone in the equipment room the night before the operation, surrounded by weapons and tactical gear. Because that's what this looks like. This looks like a man getting his affairs in order. Danny didn't look up from the rifle he was cleaning. I'm planning to finish what I started. Whatever that takes. That's not an answer, it's the only answer I have. Danny finally met his friend's eyes. Hawk killed Tommy. He destroyed my career. He's been running security for an operation that sells human beings like livestock. Whatever happens tomorrow night, I'm going to make sure he pays for all of it. Mike was quiet for a long moment. Then he stepped closer and put a hand on Danny's shoulder. Just remember what's waiting for you on the other side. A little girl in Arizona who needs her father to come home. Danny thought about Lily, about the promise he had made. He thought about the fear in her eyes when she asked him to win, to beat the bad guys, to come back to her. I remember. Danny's voice softened. Believe me, Mike, that's the only thing keeping me human right now. The night before the operation, Danny drove to San Diego. Not to the task force headquarters, not to any of the locations they had been surveilling. He drove to the Fort Rosecrans National Cemetery where Tommy Chen was buried. The cemetery was quiet in the darkness. Rows of white headstones stretching across the manicured grass like an army of ghosts standing at attention. Danny walked among them, reading names and dates, paying silent tribute to the thousands of warriors who had given everything in service to their country. Tommy's grave was near the western edge of the cemetery, overlooking the Pacific Ocean. The headstone was simple, like all the others, bearing only the essential facts of a life that had been so much more than facts could convey. Tommy Chen, Petty Officer First Class, United States Navy, 1989-2021. Beloved son, husband, and warrior. Danny stood before the headstone for a long time, listening to the distant murmur of the ocean, feeling the cool night air against his face. He had brought a bottle of beer, the IPA that Tommy had always favored, and he set it on the grass beside the stone. I know who did it, Tommy. Danny spoke the words aloud, his voice steady despite the emotion churning inside him. I know it was Hawk. I know he killed you to protect himself, to keep you from exposing what he'd become. The wind stirred the grass around him, and Danny could almost imagine it was Tommy's voice, that familiar wry humor telling him to stop being so dramatic. I'm going after him tomorrow night, Danny continued. We're taking down the whole operation, everyone involved in what they've been doing. Kessler, Hawk, all of them. And when it's done, when they're all in custody or in the ground, maybe I can finally let you rest. He paused, looking up at the stars that were visible here, away from the city lights. I'm not doing this for revenge, brother. I know that's what everyone thinks, but it's not true. I'm doing this because it's right. Because those women deserve to be saved. Because Hawk needs to answer for what he's done. And because somewhere along the way I realized that the man you believed I was, the man you died trusting, he's still in here. He's been sleeping for 3 years, but he's awake now. Danny reached down and touched the cold stone, feeling the carved letters under his fingertips. I'm going to finish this, Tommy. For you, for me, for all of us. And then I'm going to go home to my daughter and try to build something good from what's left. He stood there for another hour until the eastern sky began to lighten with the first hints of dawn. Then he bent down, retrieved the empty beer bottle, and walked back to his truck. The day of the operation was the longest day of Danny's life. He moved through it in a state of heightened awareness, every sense sharpened, every nerve alive with anticipation. The task force gathered for final briefings, reviewed positions, checked equipment. The atmosphere was tense, electric, the feeling of warriors about to go into battle. By nightfall, they were in position. Long Beach Harbor stretched before them, a maze of shipping containers and warehouses shrouded in fog. The Marine layer had rolled in from the Pacific, reducing visibility to a few hundred yards and muffling sounds in a way that was both blessing and curse. It would help them approach unseen, but it would also make communication difficult and increase the risk of friendly fire. Danny moved through the shadows with the silent precision of a predator, his weapon up his eyes, scanning for threats. Behind him, his team followed in a single file line, 8 operators who had been briefed on the plan and understood their roles. FBI, NCIS, local SWAT. Good people, well-trained, but none of them had the experience Danny carried in his bones. The warehouse they were targeting sat at the edge of the water, a massive structure that had once processed legitimate cargo, but now served as a holding facility for human merchandise. Intel indicated that 9 women were being held inside awaiting transfer to a cargo ship that was scheduled to depart at midnight. If the task force didn't move in the next 2 hours, those women would disappear into international waters and be lost forever. Danny led his team to the east entrance, using the shipping containers for cover. The fog swirled around them cold and damp, and somewhere in the distance, a foghorn sounded its mournful call. All teams in position. The voice came through Danny's earpiece, calm and professional. Execute on my mark. Danny took a breath, feeling the familiar rush of adrenaline that preceded combat. His heart rate slowed rather than quickened, a counterintuitive response that came from years of training. His vision sharpened, his hands steadied. He was ready. The signal came. A burst of static, a code word, and then the night erupted into chaos. Flashbang grenades shattered the darkness. Brilliant bursts of light and sound that disoriented the guards and announced the assault. Danny was moving before the echoes faded, his weapon up his body, flowing through the door with the fluid grace of a man who had done this 1,000 times before. The first guard went down before he could react, a controlled burst to the center mass that dropped him where he stood. The second was turning, reaching for his weapon, when Danny's teammate took him out with a precise shot that ended the threat before it could begin. They moved through the warehouse like a well-oiled machine, clearing rooms, neutralizing hostiles, advancing toward the center of Admiral, where the women were being held. Gunfire echoed through the space, short controlled bursts punctuated by the screams of men who had chosen the wrong side and were now paying the price. And then Danny saw him. Hawk stood at the far end of the warehouse near a door that led to the docks. He was older than Danny remembered, his hair fully gray, now his face lined with years of hard living. But his stance was unchanged, that easy readiness of a predator at rest, and his eyes were the same too. Cold, empty, devoid of anything that resembled humanity. Danny stopped. The chaos of the assault faded around him, the gunfire and shouting becoming distant background noise. All he could see was Hawk. All he could feel was the weight of 3 years of grief and rage and unanswered questions. Hawk saw him too. Recognition flickered across his face, followed by something that might have been amusement. Danny Reeves. His voice carried across the space between them, calm and unhurried. I wondered when you would find me. You killed Tommy. Danny's voice was steady, but his grip on his weapon was white-knuckled. You murdered your own brother. Tommy was a liability. Hawk shrugged as if discussing the weather. He discovered what I was doing and was going to expose everything. I made a tactical decision. A tactical decision. Danny felt something snap inside him. The control he had maintained, the discipline he had practiced crumbled in the face of Hawk's casual dismissal. You killed him because he threatened your profits, because he chose honor over corruption, because he was a better man than you ever were. Hawk's eyes narrowed. Careful, Danny. You're letting emotion cloud your judgment. That's not what I taught you. You taught me to be a warrior, to protect the innocent, to stand for something greater than myself. Danny took a step forward. You betrayed everything you claimed to believe in. I evolved. Hawk's voice hardened. I saw the world for what it really is. A marketplace where everything has a price, including loyalty, including honor, including human lives. I simply learned to be a seller rather than a commodity. Danny raised his weapon. It's over, Hawk. You're under arrest for murder, treason, and conspiracy to commit human trafficking. Hawk laughed, a cold sound that held no humor. You think you can take me in after everything I taught you? He shifted into a fighting stance. Let's see what you've learned since we last met. He moved first, faster than a man his age should be able to move, closing the distance between them in a heartbeat. Danny reacted on instinct, deflecting the strike that would have crushed his throat, countering with an elbow to the ribs that Hawk blocked and turned into a throw that sent Danny sliding across the concrete floor. Danny was on his feet in an instant, his weapon lost somewhere in the darkness. It didn't matter. This had become something else now, something older and more primal than guns and bullets. This was two warriors facing each other in the ancient dance of combat, each knowing the other's strengths and weaknesses, each seeking the advantage that would end the fight. They came together again, exchanging blows with a speed and precision that would have seemed impossible to an observer. Hawk was stronger, more experienced, but Danny had something that his former mentor lacked. A reason to win, a promise to keep. A little girl in Arizona who was waiting for her father to come home. The fight was brutal and fast, a symphony of strikes and counters that pushed both men to their limits. Danny took a hit to the jaw that made stars explode behind his eyes, but he kept moving, kept fighting, refusing to go down. He landed a knee to Hawk's midsection that doubled the older man over, followed by an elbow to the back of the head that should have ended it. But Hawk was a survivor. He rolled with the blow, came up with a knife that seemed to appear from nowhere, and slashed at Danny's face with a speed that nearly took his eye. Danny felt the blade kiss his cheek, felt the hot rush of blood down his face, but he didn't stop. He caught Hawk's wrist twisted, applied the same lock that had served him in a parking lot months ago. The knife clattered to the ground, and Danny drove his forehead into Hawk's nose with a crunch of breaking cartilage. Hawk staggered backward, blood streaming from his shattered nose. And for the first time, Danny saw something other than cold calculation in his eyes. He saw fear. "You've gotten better." Hawk's voice was thick with blood, but not good enough. He reached for something at his belt, a backup weapon, a last resort. But Danny was faster. He closed the distance in a single stride, caught Hawk's head in both hands, and slammed it into the steel wall of a shipping container. Once, twice, 3 times, Hawk collapsed unconscious but alive. Danny stood over him, breathing hard blood from the cut on his face dripping onto the concrete floor. For a long moment, he didn't move. He could kill Hawk right now, end the threat permanently. Justice for Tommy, delivered in the only language that men like Hawk truly understood. But Mike's words echoed in his mind. A little girl in Arizona who needs her father to come home. And Tommy's voice from 1,000 memories and 1,000 dreams. "You're better than this, brother. You always were." Danny stepped back. He pulled a zip tie from his pocket and secured Hawk's hands behind his back. Then he activated his radio. "Ghost is down. Primary target secured, moving to assist with hostage recovery." The rest of the operation was a blur of coordinated violence and desperate rescue. Danny joined his teammates in clearing the remaining hostages, neutralizing the last pockets of resistance, and finally opening the container where the women had been held. There were 9 of them, just as intelligence had predicted. 9 women ranging in age from 20 to 35, their faces gaunt with fear, their eyes hollow with trauma. They had been drugged, restrained, treated like cargo rather than human beings. But they were alive and they were free, and as Danny helped them out of the container and into the arms of waiting paramedics, he felt something he hadn't felt in a very long time. Purpose. This was why he had become a warrior. Not for glory, not for medals, not for the adrenaline rush of combat, but for moments like this when the darkness retreated and the innocent were saved and justice, real justice, was done. Victor Kessler was arrested at the scene, his empire crumbling around him, as FBI agents cataloged evidence and rounded up his remaining associates. 17 arrests in total, 9 women rescued. A trafficking network that had operated with impunity for a decade finally brought down. Danny watched from the edges as Kessler was led away in handcuffs, his face a mask of impotent fury. The man who had threatened Lily, who had ordered the kidnapping of countless women, who had built a fortune on human suffering, was finally going to answer for his crimes. It wasn't enough. Nothing could ever be enough, not for the victims who had already been lost, not for the families who would never see their daughters again. But it was something, a start, a step in the direction of a world where monsters like Kessler couldn't operate in the shadows. Mike found him standing by the water, staring at the dark expanse of the harbor. "It's done." Mike's voice was quiet, respectful of the moment. "We did it, brother." Danny nodded slowly. He thought about Tommy, about the promise he had made at the graveside. He thought about Lily, about the promise he had made to her. "What happens now?" Now Mike clapped him on the shoulder. "Now you go home. You hold your daughter. You start living the life you've earned." Danny was quiet for a long moment. Then he turned to his friend. "There's something else I need to do first. Something I should have done a long time ago." The meeting with Admiral Harrison took place 6 months later in his office at the naval base in San Diego. Danny sat across from the man who had started him on this journey, the father of the woman he had saved in a parking lot what felt like a lifetime ago. "Chief Reeves." The Admiral stood and shook Danny's hand. "I wanted to thank you personally for everything you have done. You were instrumental in taking down that operation. You saved lives, just doing my part, sir. You did far more than that." The Admiral gestured for Danny to sit. "The case against Kessler is airtight. He'll spend the rest of his life in prison. And Hawkins," he paused, his expression hardening, "Hawkins is facing the death penalty for treason and murder." Danny nodded. He had followed the case from afar, had read the reports and watched the news coverage. Hawk was done. The man who had killed Tommy, who had betrayed everything they stood for, would never hurt anyone again. "So what now?" The Admiral leaned back in his chair. "Are you going back to corporate security assessments?" Danny shook his head. Actually, sir, I've been thinking about something else. Tell me. Danny took a breath, organizing thoughts that had been forming for months. There are a lot of veterans out there like me, men and women who served their country, who gave everything they had, and then came home to find they didn't know how to live in a world that didn't need warriors anymore. They have skills, training, experience, but they don't know what to do with it. They feel lost, purposeless. The Admiral nodded slowly. I've seen it myself, good people struggling to find their place. I want to help them. Danny leaned forward. I want to start a training program, something that takes what we learned in the service and channels it toward protecting people, saving lives. Not as mercenaries or contractors, but as guardians, a force for good. And how would this program work? We'd recruit veterans who are struggling with the transition. Give them structure, purpose, a new mission. Train them in protection, rescue, crisis response. Then deploy them where they're needed, whether that's providing security for domestic violence, shelters, assisting in search and rescue operations, or supporting law enforcement in high-risk situations. The Admiral studied him for a long moment. That sounds like a significant undertaking. It is, but I've seen what happens when people like us don't have a purpose. We destroy ourselves, or we become like Hawk, twisted into something that betrays everything we once believed. Danny met the Admiral's eyes. I want to offer another path, a way to keep serving, keep protecting, even after the uniform comes off. Admiral Harrison was quiet for a long time. Then he smiled. That sounds like a damn fine idea, Chief. Let me know if you need help getting it started. I will, sir. Danny stood and shook the Admiral's hand. As he walked out of the office, he felt something he hadn't felt in years. Hope for the future. A sense that the battles ahead were ones worth fighting. And the knowledge that his best days weren't behind him. They were just beginning. The reunion with Lily happened at the Phoenix airport 6 months after Danny had sent her away to keep her safe. He stood at the arrivals gate, his heart pounding with an anticipation that no combat situation had ever produced. The crowds parted, and there she was. His daughter, taller than he remembered, her golden hair pulled back in a ponytail, her blue eyes scanning the terminal until they found him. Daddy! She ran. Danny knelt and caught her in his arms, sweeping her up, holding her against his chest as she wrapped her arms around his neck and sobbed with joy. I missed you, Bug. The words came out rough, choked with emotion. I missed you so much. I missed you too, Daddy. More than all the stars. They held each other for a long time, neither wanting to let go. Around them, travelers moved past, caught up in their own journeys, unaware that they were witnessing a miracle. A father returned from war. A daughter reunited with her hero. Margaret stood nearby, watching with tears in her eyes. When Danny finally set Lily down, she stepped forward and embraced her son. Welcome back. It's good to be back, Mom. They walked out of the airport together, a family reunited, and Danny felt the last of the weight he had been carrying finally lift from his shoulders. The mission was complete. The enemy was defeated, and the future stretched before them, bright with possibility. 1 year later, Danny stood before a group of 15 veterans in the training facility he had built in San Diego. Guardian Shield, he had named it, a reference to the ancient warriors who had protected the innocent and stood against the darkness. The men and women before him came from every branch of the military, carrying scars both visible and invisible. They had served in Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, places that most Americans had never heard of. They had given parts of themselves that could never be recovered. And now they were here searching for something they had lost. A purpose. You've all served your country, Danny's voice filled the room. You've all made sacrifices that most people will never understand. And you've all come here because you're looking for something, a reason to keep going, a way to use what you've learned without losing who you are. He looked at each face in turn, seeing himself reflected in their eyes. I'm here to tell you that the fight doesn't end when you hang up the uniform. It just changes shape. There are still people out there who need protecting. There are still battles worth fighting. And you, all of you, have the skills and the training to make a difference. The door at the back of the room opened, and Lily slipped inside carrying a tray of cookies she had baked with her grandmother. She smiled at Danny, and he felt his heart swell with love and pride. Heroes don't always wear uniforms. Danny continued, sometimes they're just fathers in parking lots who refuse to look away when someone needs help. Sometimes they're veterans who decide that their best days aren't behind them. Sometimes they're ordinary people who make extraordinary choices. He looked at his daughter, at the faces of the veterans before him, at the future they would build together. Find your mission. Protect those who cannot protect themselves. Serve in whatever way you can, because the fight never really ends. It just takes a different form. That night, Danny tucked Lily into bed in their new house, a modest place on the outskirts of San Diego, with a view of the mountains and enough space for a dog that Lily was already campaigning for. "Daddy?" Her voice was sleepy content. "Yeah, Bug. I'm proud of you." Danny felt his throat tighten. He leaned down and kissed her forehead. "I'm proud of you too, Lily. You're the bravest person I know." She smiled, her eyes drifting closed. "Daddy, yes, you kept your promise. You came home." Danny watched her drift off to sleep, then sat beside her bed for a long time, watching the rise and fall of her breathing, marveling at the miracle of her existence. He thought about Jennifer, about Tommy, about all the people he had loved and lost. He thought about Hawk and Kessler and the darkness that still existed in the world. He thought about the veterans he was training and the lives they would save, the difference they would make. And he realized that for the first time in years, he wasn't looking backward. He was looking forward. The nightmares still came sometimes in the dark hours before dawn. Tommy's face, Hawk's empty eyes, the smell of blood and smoke and desert sand. They would probably never go away entirely, those ghosts of battles past. But now, when Danny woke in the darkness, he didn't feel lost. He felt found. He had a purpose, a mission, a reason to keep fighting. He had his daughter, his mother, his brothers and sisters in arms. He had a future worth building. Danny walked to the window and looked out at the night sky. The stars were bright over the mountains, thousands of points of light, burning in the darkness, eternal and unchanging. More than all the stars, Bug. He whispered the words into the quiet room. "That's how much I love you. That's how hard I'll fight to give you the world you deserve." Outside, the night was peaceful. Inside, his daughter slept. And somewhere in the distance, a new day was waiting to be born. Danny Reeves' warrior father guardian stood at the window and watched the stars. And for the first time in a very long time, he smiled. The fight wasn't over. It would never be over, not really. But that was okay, because some fights were worth fighting forever.